Tim Berger, reporter with Roll Call. What is the purpose of this House Intelligence Committee hearing we're about to see?
Well, Congressman McCurdy of Oklahoma, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, called the hearing to look at a plan which was put into law by one or two senators on the Appropriations Committee that would move about 6,000 CIA employees from the Washington metropolitan area to locations in Gainesville, Virginia, and Charleston, West Virginia. What McCurdy wants to know is, was this a backroom deal that was just signed off on by Senator Byrd, who chairs the Senate Appropriations Committee, with some compliance by Senator Warner of Virginia, or was this actually done through the proper channels, which means dealing with the General Services Administration, which helps procure land and federal buildings and to determine where a facility would be placed? Did they go through a proper bidding process? Who owns the land that is earmarked for this facility? And what would the impact be on the CIA employees, some 6,000 of them that would be affected by the move?
You said it was made into law. What was the process?
Well, according to McCurdy, the only committee that ever really saw this legislation before it entered the process in the final stages was the Senate Appropriations Committee. Senator Byrd is from West Virginia, and he has publicly said that he's going to do everything he can to bring as many millions or billions of federal dollars. This project is $1.3 billion to West Virginia to help improve their troubled economy. He has no shame whatsoever about taking jobs from the D.C. area and moving it out to West Virginia. He says there's no reason, given the modern communications age, that everything should be clustered in Washington.
Was there a need for a new building for the CIA, or is this just a new building?
That's exactly one of the questions that we will hear about today when the CIA testifies, along with the General Services Administration and several local members of Congress who find themselves, while West Virginia might be in line to gain some jobs, find themselves in the Washington metropolitan area about to lose some jobs.
You mentioned that the CIA representatives will testify today. Is it known whether the CIA wanted to have their offices moved?
That's another of the questions that McCurdy will be wanting to answer. I think one of the key questions is, whose idea was this? And what were the underpinnings of the idea? You know, who decided that this was a good idea, and what were their reasons?
You mentioned that some 6,000 jobs are involved. Does that mean that the people in the D.C. area who currently hold those jobs will lose them unless they're willing to move to West Virginia?
Probably not. There certainly will be provisions made so that people won't actually be fired because of Byrd moving this out to Virginia, if indeed it holds. I'm sure that there's potential, although it's not very likely, that if McCurdy finds that something was wrong with this, which there's no way of saying yes or no. I assume that Senator Byrd was operating as usual, completely above board, but if somehow there was found to be something wrong with this, or if there was enough opposition, it could be reversed, I'm sure. Now, as for the jobs in the Virginia area, they would protect them, although these people would certainly be encouraged. McCurdy finds that something was wrong with this, which there's no way of saying yes or no. I assume that Senator Byrd was operating as usual, completely above board, but if somehow there was found to be something wrong with this, or if there was enough opposition, it could be reversed, I'm sure. Now, as for the jobs in the Virginia area, they would protect them, although these people would certainly be encouraged to go along with the move.
What does this say about the power of one member of Congress? Is it unusual to see one senator wielding so much power, or is this just an example of trying to do something for your district?
Well, it's a little bit unusual to see such large moves contemplated as Byrd has done. You know, moving 6,000 employees is quite substantial. I think one thing that says is that under the fiscal constraints that the country is seeing, and under the new budget agreement, where you can't really find new spending, you sort of have to take current projects and move them around. Byrd can't just go to West Virginia and say, okay, we're starting this new facility. He sort of has to say, well, it's a good idea to move an existing facility to West Virginia because that won't cost quite as much as it might to start something brand new. Now, the Appropriations Committee in both houses has tremendous power, and the chairman of that committee, partly because he controls the pen that writes the bills, also because he has, over the years, given favors to members, both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat, up and down the rolls of the House and Senate. They will have given favors to other members so that Byrd has been known, when challenged on certain projects. For example, Senator Chafee of Rhode Island last year once said he raised some kind of objection to a provision Byrd had inserted, and Byrd on the floor publicly took the opportunity to thank him for a note Chafee had sent him thanking him for a certain project he had facilitated in Rhode Island. And Chafee immediately stopped his objections to the other thing. These people are experts at calling in chits, and they don't mind doing so, and that helps their power.
Now, who will we see testifying today before the committee?
Well, among members of the House of Representatives, you'll see Congressman Frank Wolf, who is himself on the House Appropriations Committee, so he might be an interesting adversary to Senator Byrd as far as the move goes. You'll see Congressman Jim Moran, a freshman Democrat from the Northern Virginia area, and you'll see D.C. Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton. Now, you'll also see a representative of the CIA.
Before you go on, what is their concern? They're upset because they'll be losing constituents' jobs?
Exactly. Now, Eleanor Holmes Norton perhaps has more grievance than anyone because, as we know, D.C. is not a state. It is the District of Columbia. They don't have 2 senators, and Norton herself can't even vote on the floor of the House of Representatives. So here you find D.C. being stripped of some of these jobs when they really don't have a sound means of defending themselves. There are about 20 different locations that these 6,000 employees would be coming from in the Northern Virginia and D.C. area, and that means, you know, that all these jobs are going to be coming from Frank Wolf, from Jim Moran, and from Norton's districts. And clearly, you know, they have a right to at least air their grievances. And certainly, I'm sure that they feel somewhat slighted that they weren't consulted. In fact, again, Wolf is a Republican. The senior senator from Virginia is John Warner, also a Republican. Warner signed off on Senator Byrd's proposal when it was made known that one of the facilities would be moved to Gainesville, Virginia, which it borders on West Virginia, and it keeps some of the jobs in Virginia. So Warner was able to, you might say, cut his losses. Perhaps Byrd had, I don't know, but perhaps there had been interest in moving more of the jobs to West Virginia. But when Warner signed off on it, he made friends with Congressman French Slaughter, another Republican of Virginia, because these jobs would be staying in French Slaughter's district. But he did not make friends with Frank Wolf, whose district will be losing jobs. So you always see some winners, some losers, and clearly in this case, Frank Wolf numbers among the losers in a sense.
And the other witnesses today?
You'll also see, as I was saying, a representative of the CIA. I'm not sure their name.
Is that unusual to see someone from the CIA testifying in an open hearing like this?
Not so much so, although it is a new thing. You don't often see open hearings on the CIA issues, but when there is, I mean, clearly someone from the CIA comes up. It's not one of your covert operatives flying in from Central America, but it's one of your, probably a political appointee who is actually hired to do this kind of thing, come up and testify. Chairman McCurdy has been making an effort to hold more hearings publicly and open up the books a little bit more on the intelligence community. In fact, the first hearing he held this year, which was ironically not very well attended, was held up in the 4th floor of the Capitol Intelligence Committee room, which is top secret, and I don't know that anyone has ever, well, no one is granted free access. It's guarded by the police all the time, and it was kind of, they all had a laugh because no reporters showed up at that.
As you mentioned, Congressman McCurdy is the new chairman of the committee. Tell us a little bit about his style. What can we expect to see today?
Well, I think the very fact that he's holding this hearing shows that he really is not shy about any kind of adversary that he might have. Now, when I spoke to him about this hearing and about what he is looking at, he insisted that he doesn't care. The hearing's not about Senator Byrd. It's about the CIA. It's about the real estate decisions involved in the intelligence community in locating their offices. He will be looking at problems, and if there's a problem that he sees or a potential problem, he will not hesitate to take it apart and figure out exactly what's wrong. He won't care who's on the other end. I think that's pretty clear. I think you also will see the fact that he's worried about where the building is going to be located shows a level of detail that we can probably expect from McCurdy.
Well, Tim Berger of Roll Call, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Next, we bring you coverage of the House Intelligence Committee hearing concerning the relocation of CIA facilities and the decision-making process involved. The witnesses at Tuesday's hearing included Representatives Frank Wolf and James Moran of Virginia. Following that, it's testimony from Robert DeLuccio of the General Services Administration and Judge William Webster, the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency.
Morning. The committee will come to order. As my colleague from Pennsylvania knows, the chair likes to start on time.
So I'm here, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate you being here. Today, the committee is meeting in open session to examine the Central Intelligence Agency's recent decision, without the knowledge or approval of this committee, to make its final site selection for a $1.3 billion consolidation of certain CIA facilities. There are over 20 CIA facilities outside the main agency compound at Langley in the Northern Virginia area. The proposal before us today is to consolidate these facilities at two locations, one in Prince William County, Virginia, near Gainesville, and the other in Jefferson County, West Virginia, near Charlestown. This committee is not opposed to consolidation. Indeed, we encourage it if consolidation makes operational and economic sense and does not place undue hardships on CIA employees and their families. However, because this committee was not kept informed of the agency's recent planning and decisions, we cannot conclude with any degree of certainty that the proposal before us is in the best interest of the government or the taxpayer. What this committee cannot accept is a site selection decision that has not been examined by this body, nor was part of the administration's budget request. In fact, the committee is in possession of a letter, which I will introduce into the record, indicating that the Office of Management and Budget is not even familiar with the CIA's plans. And GSA, the federal property manager, was not consulted on the plan. By law, a covert action warrants notification to Congress and receives much more oversight than has provided in this case. An expenditure of public funds in the amount of $1.3 billion, one of the largest federal construction projects in history, deserves much more scrutiny than has been provided so far. And yet, this proposal was incorporated into the Senate version of the fiscal year 1992 Intelligence Authorization Bill. Our initial examination of CIA's records and interviews of decision makers show an alarming incongruence. For example, an independent consultant was hired by the CIA to do site selection analysis. However, agency officials appear to have disregarded the consultant's advice and chose a site that, according to the consultant, was considered and rejected as not being sufficiently suitable to make their list of the top 200 sites. Furthermore, while the consultant was originally instructed to consider only a single site for consolidation, the CIA decided somewhat late in the game to go with two specific sites by including the one previously rejected by the consultant. The CIA has a poor record in its consolidation efforts. The Reston program, an attempt to consolidate at Reston, Virginia, was a failure because of improper planning. In 1988, at my insistence, this committee went on record as saying, and I quote, "The committee believes the agency's approach to meeting office space requirements has been both haphazard and excessively costly. In reviewing agency plans for the Reston Corporate Center and Headquarters Complex, the committee found that the CIA not only failed to anticipate facilities requirements resulting from personnel growth and the acquisition of new equipment, but when the requirements became apparent, lacked the necessary procedures or mechanisms to arrive at a cost-effective solution." So now, almost 4 years later, we see the same problems cropping up again. As we review the process used to develop the relocation plan, we seek answers to the following questions. What are the requirements for this consolidation? How do these requirements translate into a need for additional space? Who in the agency has the qualifications to plan and manage such a consolidation? What are community-wide policies and procedures which govern real estate acquisition and construction? What are the true costs of this project? And why did the CIA choose not to request the consolidation in the House FY92 Intelligence Authorization Bill, then announce its decision only days after this committee completed action? Our first witnesses today are the Honorable Frank Wolf from Virginia and the Honorable James P. Moran, also of Virginia. We also will have statements included in the record on behalf of the Honorable Eleanor Holmes Norton, delegate from the District of Columbia, and the Honorable Harley Staggers from West Virginia as well.
So Mr. Slaughter and OMB letters.
And the statement by also Mr. Slaughter from Virginia, and into the record OMB statement and letters. After our initial witnesses, they will be followed by Mr. Robert J. DeLuccio, Assistant Commissioner, Office of Real Property Management, Public Buildings and Service for the General Services Administration. And our final witness will be the Honorable William H. Webster, the Director of Central Intelligence. With that, I will now recognize the distinguished ranking member from Pennsylvania, Mr. Schuster, for any comments that he may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to associate myself with your remarks virtually in their entirety. This may be a wonderful idea, this $1.3 billion expenditure to consolidate CIA operations, or it may be a terrible idea. But this committee, which has the jurisdiction for authorizing intelligence programs, certainly would be in no position to know, because the CIA has kept this committee in the dark. In fact, Mr. Chairman, I think we should add a new twist to our efforts at reorganization. What we should do is take the facilities people at CIA and put them in charge of covert operations, because they've run quite a very successful covert operation here in keeping virtually everybody but a few people from West Virginia in the other body in the dark about this. And the people in the operations directorate should be put over in facilities, because their covert operations we usually read about in the newspapers. So I just wish the CIA's covert operations could be as successful and effective as this very covert facilities operation. I find it absolutely disgraceful that they have proceeded on this basis. Indeed, Judge Webster, after we later learned, after being in the Senate and briefing the anointed, privileged few over there who were aware of this, came directly to us, you may recall, Mr. Chairman, and we had a meeting. In fact, he was late for our meeting because he had been over there discussing this subject, but it was certainly not brought up to us even after it had been discussed there. So I find this absolutely reprehensible, and I think we should get to the bottom of the way the CIA is being managed or mismanaged. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Chair. I want to associate myself with the remarks of the gentleman from Pennsylvania who associated his remarks with those of the chairman, and double the emphasis by also deploring the very idea that this committee would not be and was not informed in any way of an impending gigantic decision such as the one apparently made by the CIA. The latest movement to move facilities into West Virginia or elsewhere comes at a time when we are trying to determine how best to consolidate. But consolidation and decentralization seem to be two opposite targets, and we ought to be in the center of making those kinds of decisions. So if indeed covert actions, as the gentleman from Pennsylvania says, is going to be the mode of the CIA in internal decisions, and they want to hide and seek on questions of where their headquarters are going to be and where their agents are going to be lodged, then we ought to be in the game from the very beginning. I thank the chair.
The gentleman from New Mexico seeks recognition.
Chairman, thank you. I want to commend you for holding these hearings and basically asserting the jurisdiction of the House over this matter and the jurisdiction of the Intelligence Committee over something logistical that has an impact, obviously, on operations. I think our objective, Mr. Chairman, should be to slow this train down. Obviously, we're talking about a request that has not been requested by the administration. We're talking about an issue that has not dealt with the entire community-wide intelligence community. As we look at changing the mission of the Intelligence Committee to adjust to new realities in the policy sense, the link also has to take place with what kind of physical facilities they have. I'm disturbed, too, about the fact that the House was not notified. I'm concerned about the cost, $1.3 billion. I'm concerned whether the CIA can take this action unilaterally without the support and oversight of agencies like GSA and OMB. But again, Mr. Chairman, I think our objective should be not to deny this request, but to slow it down, to examine it carefully. It's proposed by a very distinguished member of Congress, Senator Byrd. It's some people in the CIA obviously are dealing with it and want to see it happen. I think our job is oversight, is consistent with our efforts at making sure the consolidation is adequate and makes sense. And for that, Mr. Chairman, I want to commend you for holding this hearing and for engaging us and thrusting this very necessarily into this process.
Thank the gentleman. Any additional comments? Hearing none, I think my statement is clear and speaks for itself. We're here to review the process by which this decision was made, and this is consistent with our oversight responsibilities. And as I indicated earlier, I had raised questions about how decisions regarding acquisition and purchase of real estate or the leasing of real estate has been made at this agency for some time now, and this is an example of that concern. Having said that, the chair will now recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Wolf, who first requested appearance before the committee. Frank, welcome, and your statement will be admitted in its entirety, and you may commence.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Schuster and the other members of the committee. Quite frankly, I learned so much just by listening to your opening statement. I did not know that this site did not even make the cut for the first 200. So the more I get into it, the more I find out. In the interest of time, I will summarize the statement that I have submitted to the committee. I plan to raise 4 questions today about the relocation plan that should be answered in the name of good government before the relocation is allowed to proceed. First, how much the relocation cost, and are these costs justified? Second, how would the relocation affect the ability of the CIA to perform its mission? Third, how the relocation would affect the 5,000 to 6,000 employees involved and their families? And last, did the process that the CIA used to develop this plan meet the standards that federal agencies should meet? At the outset, I want to commend you for holding these hearings, which should shed light on the relocation plan. Congress has been kept in the dark about the decision. Even though the plan would, at the cost of $1.2 or $1.3 billion, it would be the most expensive federal office building construction in the history of the country. And the House and almost the entire Senate have been left totally out of the process. Because members of the House have been left out of the decision-making process on the relocation plan, many members have not focused on this matter. Given that the relocation would involve thousands of employees at a very important agency of the federal government and will cost more than $1 billion, the lack of congressional consultation is troubling. The history of the CIA relocation is murky, but it is its origins began several years ago when the agency began to review ways to reduce the cost of leasing space in the National Capital Region. A group at the CIA was tasked with considering various options, including the consolidation of facilities at existing and new locations. During this period, the CIA failed to inform Congress of the scope of its plans. In fact, in recent months, CIA officials were purposefully vague and, I believe, misled me about the status of the relocation plan. I was told on several occasions that the plans for relocation were still in a preliminary stage, right up until the plan was announced as a done deal. And earlier this year, I was urged not to discuss publicly the plans for relocation. Did the top leadership of the CIA want to make sure that the House had already completed action on the fiscal year 1992 Intelligence Authorization Act before making known the true scope of the relocation plan? The intelligence bill passed the House on June 11. On the same day, I had a letter hand-delivered to CIA Director William Webster, which posed 47 separate questions about the pending plans for consolidation. This letter was followed up by a meeting that I had with Director Webster in which I raised several concerns about the proposed relocation. I was told at that time, as I have been told over the past several months, that the CIA was still in the initial phases of considering the relocation. Despite my request and despite the language in the report to the Intelligence Authorization Bill, which called for a thorough analysis of the need, on June 20, a plan was announced that would close 21 Washington area CIA offices. In my remarks today, I will draw upon the June 11 letter I sent to CIA Director Webster and from his July 6 response. Judge Webster's July 6 letter indicates that the CIA relocation plan will cost $1.2 billion, making it, as I said, the most expensive in the history of the country. The construction cost alone would total $660 million. It is more than the cost of any of the pending consolidations of other federal agencies, even those that include special security requirements. For construction, the agency will have to use approved sources of materials, and during construction, these materials will need to be inspected. The construction companies involved will be required to use screened personnel. Look at the CIA and the Moscow embassy situation. To have two different sites and go through that process really doesn't make any sense. Moving costs, according to Director July 6 letter, would be $2 million. It may cost more if the move requires guards at both ends and along the route of the transport. Employee relocation may push the $1.2 billion figure higher, since some employees would be eligible for government reimbursement for relocation costs. Secure communications would be a major added expense. Security clearances for the employees who replace those who choose not to relocate will be expensive. It is my understanding that these clearances are now averaging between 9 and 15 months to complete at a cost of approximately $13,000 per clearance. What would the effect on the CIA operations be? Creating two separate, distinct new CIA facilities with one up to 2 hours from the District of Columbia could have profound effect on the ability of the CIA to perform its mission. The relocation plan as it stands would create disunity at the agency by creating geographic separation. Each campus would develop its own personality of us versus them. The plan would help the morale of the employees. Dislocating employees and drastically affecting their daily commute will have a very negative effect on the ability to perform their jobs. It would affect the ability of the CIA to perform its role coordinating intelligence among many federal agencies in Washington. And during these times of heightened national security activity, the CIA must get information to federal agencies at a moment's notice. It would affect the CIA employees who maintain cover for mission purposes and never acknowledge their actual place of employment. Will maintaining cover be possible in rural area West Virginia? Maintaining cover in Northern Virginia and the Washington metropolitan area has been easy because there are so many federal employees. What is the impact on the employees? I have worked over the years with my colleagues in both parties to promote the interests of federal employees. Many of the programs that I have championed, such as child care, on-site child care, as a result of my language, there are 71 child care facilities now operating in the federal government, including one at the CIA. Leave sharing and flexi-time and flexi-place and work schedules currently benefit CIA employees. The CIA's greatest asset is its people, yet the CIA leadership has not given sufficient weight to employees in formulating the relocation plan. Employees at the CIA facilities involved in the relocation plan have become part of their communities in Virginia and Maryland and the District of Columbia. They've joined places of worship, are involved in community service, have spouses employed in the area, and children active in local schools. As the ranking member of the Select Committee on Children, Youth, and Families, I am very concerned that the needs of these families be taken into account, and I don't believe that they have. The director's letter of July 6 indicate that the agency expects employees to either commute or retire. Employees would have to endure a 3 to 4 hour daily commute from parts of Northern Virginia, where the majority of current employees live, to Jefferson County. A 4-hour daily commute will affect the morale and performance at the new facilities. In icy weather and bad rain, just this morning, coming from my house in Vienna, it took me over an hour to get in downtown Washington to the Capitol at about between 7 and 8 in the morning. The long commute would affect the family lives of CIA employees and so many other ways of hours spent away from the family. The CIA leadership expects many current employees to leave the agency rather than relocate. What does this mean for employees with years of experience? Intelligence positions can be highly specialized. Think how difficult it is for a man or woman in their mid-50s to change jobs. How many employees would relocate to West Virginia? The FBI found out that only 32% of employees at the FBI Identification Division, which will move to West Virginia, would relocate. And many of these, their families have been severely disrupted where a husband or a wife have another job. The director's July 6 response indicated by the year 2000, 52% of employees will be female. The number of employees with working spouses and school-aged children will increase proportionally. What provisions would be made for working parents? What provisions would be made for parents of children with special educational needs, physical or emotional needs that are currently being met in the programs in this area? The process. Many serious concerns have been raised about the manner in which the site selection process for the relocation was conducted and about the way the plan was announced on June 20 was developed. Given the size and the scope, it could set a very troubling precedent. GSA was not involved. Many will be surprised to learn that GSA, the lead agency on federal office space matters, was not involved. It was not involved despite its record of coordinating with CIA on several million square feet of office space. GSA has planned, designed, and acquired space for CIA and for other agencies with security requirements, yet in this case, they were not consulted. Had GSA been involved, it would have conducted a more orderly and appropriate procurement process, but instead, the CIA spent additional taxpayer dollars by going to an outside consultant. Moreover, it is my understanding that neither the OMB nor the White House was involved in developing this plan. Talk about a group of people out of control. I mean, with the president having been the former director of Central Intelligence Agency, and for the White House and OMB not to even be notified or informed of this is really, I think, something that's really uncalled for. It is unclear whether the CIA followed any formal rules of procurement. Director Webster's July 6 letter states that a real estate consultant was retained by the CIA and that the consultant screened properties, ranked them, and that only 4 primary sites were submitted to senior CIA management for consideration. That appears to run counter to what the chairman said in his opening statement. This approach would raise serious concerns in any procurement process, much less this one, which involves $1.2 billion in federal funds. This Congress has spent more time working on procurement, and this violates everything that we've ever done. Why was there no public solicitation for offers? Why were there no extended negotiations to obtain best and final offers? Why has there been no assessment of the environmental impacts of potential courses of action? Was an environmental impact statement prepared? What would the impact of the plan be on soil, water, air quality to proposed sites? What would the impact be upon vegetation and wildlife? Why have there been no assessments of the traffic impacts of the relocation plan? The CIA proposes that the employees commute along Route 7 and 9. Route 9 is a winding road that's not scheduled to be widened. The VDOT, Virginia Department of Transportation, project indicate that traffic along Route 7 will double in the next 20 years. Why was there no attempt to locate the site near a metro system? Congress has spent billions of dollars to build the best metro system in the country. Many members have supported those funds because it was for federal employees and others to get back to work. And yet there will be no mass transit, believe me, to the West Virginia site. Why was there no attempt to take advantage of the commercial space market in Northern Virginia, which is depressed? Many will also have serious misgivings about the manner in which the relocation plan was developed. What interest is served when a handshake and a nod behind closed doors settle a plan that would impact and affect 5,000 to 6,000 employees and their families, would have cost over $1 billion, and would determine the very course of one of the most important agencies of the federal government? The federal government ought not, should not operate that way. In closing, I want to conclude with a few suggestions for the committee to consider, and they parallel pretty much what the chairman said. No major relocation plan should be adopted until its cost, including construction, relocation, and the many incidental costs, are justified by tangible benefits to the agency and documented savings in operational lease costs. No relocation plan should be adopted unless it is established that the plan would not adversely affect the operations of the CIA. No relocation plan should be adopted until assurances are made that it will not result in the dislocation of thousands of employees who have been faithful to this agency, who would face the problems of selling their homes or a long daily commute or other negative impacts on their families. No relocation plan should be adopted unless the CIA and the GSA jointly conduct a fair, orderly, open, and competitive procurement process, which includes a delineated geographic area that keeps the new CIA facility within a reasonable distance from CIA headquarters in downtown Washington. I believe that the committee should also take a hard look at the basic premise of this relocation. If the CIA wants to consolidate to save money, then it is common sense that the greatest savings would occur if there were only one consolidation located relatively close to the headquarters at Langley. Until these items are addressed, many and most citizens and most members of Congress and the American public will remain unconvinced that the relocation plan as it now stands is warranted. These concerns should be addressed before the CIA is authorized to proceed with its present course for the sake of the employees involved, the American taxpayer, and the integrity of the Central Intelligence Agency, and the integrity of the whole process of how a government works. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman for a statement. Clearly, he raises a number of valid questions that this committee will seek to have answered as we review this further. The gentleman from Virginia, Ms. Moran, is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will submit my statement for the record, and I'll try to summarize the points in it, because so many of them are reiterative of what Congressman Wolf has said. I do want to associate myself with every point that he has made, as well as his level of concern. And it was a very good statement, Frank. Thank you. We're here because the proposal that has been handed down by the Senate is absolutely wrong from a procedural standpoint. But it may very well not be in the interest of the federal taxpayer, the employees at the CIA, or in fact national security. And that's what we hope that you and know that you will consider very carefully. The decision to locate the consolidated CIA was made with little regard for the cost of the project and with little communication with area officials. From what I read in the Washington Post, it appeared that the proposal focused more on economic development and creating jobs in a depressed economy than with promoting the interests of national security or, in fact, the interests of the federal protecting the interests of the federal taxpayer. The first question is costs. Officials at the CIA claimed that the main impetus behind consolidating the different auxiliaries was that it was not cost efficient to have these operations dispersed throughout the city in leased office space. The government, it was claimed, could save money by bringing the operations together and linking the annex with the main facility in Langley. If this is the case, then wouldn't it be much more cost effective to bring the operation together under one roof? Of the $1.2 billion that the CIA expects to spend on the new facilities, one might ask how much is for duplicated functions. The Langley complex was the second most expensive government building ever constructed. As Mr. Wolf has said, we're now talking about the most expensive federal government building. I don't think there is anyone in this room who would honestly say that we can afford to build two new Langleys, especially when we only need to build one, and particularly in this time of what ought to be severe fiscal constraint. The second factor is employee morale. I said earlier that I was surprised to hear of the consolidation and relocation proposal the night it was decided. Imagine how those CIA employees felt as they read about the decision in the morning's paper. As the representative of many of those individuals who will be affected by the consolidation, I have been contacted by many of those employees whose lives and whose families could be severely disrupted by this relocation. We're talking about families having to pull their children out of school. Most of the families have both spouses in the workforce, so one of those spouses is going to very possibly either lose their job or it will necessitate the CIA employee from leaving their job. Not to mention the social and economic network within our communities that will be disrupted. Given the specialized nature of the agency, though, these concerns have been registered in unusual ways. Anonymous telephone calls and letters, virtually every one of them have said in the letter or in the telephone call that they know that if they were found communicating with their congressperson over this decision, that their job would be jeopardized and they would, in essence, they would probably be fired. So I'm sure that there's far more concern that is even being registered, as much as that is. But even though that concern is anonymous, it's certainly important and I think quite justified. Up until the notice appeared in the Washington Post, the CIA management assured their employees that there was no plan to move. Today, these same employees still don't know if they are going to remain in their current office or relocate to Prince William or Jefferson County. Frank has addressed the third question, which is national security, and you have far more expertise to make this judgment. So I will not address that, but I'm confident that you will. The most important process, it would seem, to be considered initially is the process that brought us here today. I was the chair of the Metropolitan Development Planning Committee with the Council of Governments for the Washington area before being elected to the Congress. One of our responsibilities is to work with General Services Administration, with the federal agencies, to know well in advance what federal agencies are planning to do, whether they're planning to expand, to move, what the effect is going to be on the socioeconomic structure of all of the local governments. We have a good relationship. Every local government is represented. We try our best to coordinate all these decisions. This couldn't be more abortive of that coordinative process. I think it gives a terrible impression, not just to the people who are directly involved at the regional and local level, but to the federal taxpayer, to the common citizen, when they get the impression that these kinds of billion-dollar decisions can be made with as Mr. Wolf says, a nod and a handshake. I don't criticize Mr. Warner at all. I'm sure that he stepped in because he had the impression that Northern Virginia was going to lose all 6,000 CIA employees. I don't even criticize Senator Byrd. He's looking out for his constituency. That's fine. He ought to be. But I think if the Central Intelligence Agency doesn't at least assume its responsibility to work in coordination with all of the authorizing and appropriation committees, with the White House, with its employees, and in the interests of the federal taxpayer as well as the interests of national security, then they certainly ought to be subject to criticism. I have a great deal of respect for Mr. Webster, but we have a situation here that demands considerable discussion, and it ought to be made as clear as possible that the impression that was left that the decision was made in the back room over on the Senate side that is going to be carried out complicitly with the rest of the Congress is absolutely wrong. That was perhaps a recommendation and no more than that, and we are now about to begin the process of making such a determination as to whether the CIA will consolidate, whether it will move, and what the extent of those, the impact of those decisions will be. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Moran, and thank you, Mr. Wolf, both for your statements. Since Mr. Moran, you've had experience in this area, let me raise this question first, and Frank, jump in if you'd like. But as Mr. Schuster and I both have stated, first of all, this is an unusual committee hearing in that it is an open session. That is not the normal process for this committee. But we're not talking about covert actions or critical crises throughout the world in foreign policy or in defense policy. We're talking about an investment decision in the federal government. We're talking about a construction. We're talking about buildings and services. And that's why I felt that it was appropriate that this be conducted in the open. Furthermore, and it really brings me to my question, doesn't the taxpayer in a situation such as this, when we're talking about potential economic benefit wherever this location may end up, doesn't the taxpayer benefit by an open process? I recall the recent negotiations on private facilities such as United Airlines looking at different locations. General Dynamics is relocating their headquarters. It appears by having an open process, it's amazing how real estate becomes competitive, how different sites are offered up, how local governments and communities work in order to try to attract these facilities. Would not the federal government, would not the taxpayer benefit by having a little more of an open process as opposed to being secretive, and which is by nature of this agency, but I think in this instance it's wrong, rather than having it completely closed? Mr. Moran?
I'm in total agreement with the thrust of your question, Mr. Chairman. The taxpayer is our boss. We all work for the same boss. They pay the bills, and they have at least the right to expect us to go through any process of consideration that would reduce that bill to them. They expect open government. They certainly defer to the judgment of the intelligence committees on the House and Senate side and to the operations of the CIA that are internal, because they know that that information can't be shared, ought not be shared, and it's a matter of trust between the taxpayer and the people involved. But this extends far beyond this. As you say, Mr. Chairman, this is not a matter of internal security. This is a matter of a governmental decision-making process that ought to be as open, as thorough, and as conscientious as possible. And clearly, to date, it has not been. And that's why we are here.
Mr. Chairman, I agree. I had a hard time finding out. Much of the information that I have, I've gotten from people calling my office. As the congressman who represents that district, and in the mid-'80s when they wanted to expand, I worked hand in glove with the agency, helping them to expand. That was going to be the mother of all consolidations. We worked closely with them to get that done. On this one, it's been very difficult to find anything. All of you who serve on the Intelligence Committee, you're all part of that. But those of us who don't serve on it, it's very difficult. And even I would go out there and plead and call and have them come up to my office. But the first time they came up to my office, they asked that my staff leave because my staff member was not clear. We were asking basic things like this. So the open process is the only way to go.
Mr. Wolf, you indicated in your statement that CIA officials were purposefully vague and misleading in your discussions. Would you care to elaborate somewhat?
Yes, the first time I met with the agency, I was going to go public with this, and they asked me not to. I called out there and asked them. There was an article in a newspaper, a local newspaper, and they didn't even tell me about it. I found out through that source. They came up and I said, I'm going to go out with the public, and they asked me not to go public with this. Every time we try to find information, they would say, we're far away from making a decision on this process. 9 days before the decision was made, I went out and had a meeting for about a half an hour or longer with Judge Webster and 2 or 3 other individuals. And at that time, when I left, I had no indication that they were even close. My sense is that, frankly, they were leaning against this and would not do it, and felt very good when I left the meeting. There were a lot of different things like that.
Thank you. Gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Schuster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We certainly appreciate your testimony. Serving on the Public Works Committee, as I do, which has jurisdiction over public buildings and grounds, it strikes me that one of the solutions that we should be very, very seriously looking at in this committee is to take real property authority away from the CIA and give that authority to GSA, which is where most of the government agencies must turn for real property construction or rental. Of course, we feel snookered not having been kept in the dark about this until this year's authorization passed, but there's next year, and I think this is a subject that we should really focus on, and I intend to make it a very high priority item to address the issue of taking real property authority away from the CIA and giving it to GSA. Now, I wonder, the two of you, with your knowledge and expertise of working with the metropolitan area and GSA, what's your reaction to that approach?
Well, I would strongly support that, and I'll co-sponsor the bill with you. I was on Public Works Committee for 4 years, and I'm the ranking Republican on the Treasury Appropriations Subcommittee, which has the jurisdiction over GSA and the public building process, and we go through it all the time. So I would strongly support that and would co-sponsor and work with you to have it passed.
I would totally agree. With the one caveat, we have a number of federal contract research centers in Alexandria. One of them was IDA and Institute for Defense Analysis. They had to put in special wiring and so on, detection devices and all. We deferred to them in terms of building code and so on. I think we behaved in as responsible a manner as the Public Works Committee could be. There are certain areas of security that you defer, and that includes a somewhat greater, well, a significantly greater cost than comparable costs for buildings of equal density and height and so on. But that's no reason not to have the process public and comparable to what would take place with other federal buildings.
Based on this outrageous, disgraceful, scandalous conduct of the CIA, I believe this is an idea as time has come, and we should pursue it. Let me turn to another question now. It struck me, having been out there several times, that the CIA headquarters is an awful lot of open space around the headquarters, and I'm told that there's perhaps 100 acres there. I asked staff the question, what's wrong with expanding right there? And I was told that the CIA has entered some form of an agreement with McLean and the community not to expand, but I'm also told that that may not be very firm, and indeed that could be renegotiated. So would either of you be able to comment on that?
I was very much part of that expansion, and they've acquired the Scattergood property, and there are some other pieces of land out there that could be used. We've added another lane on the Beltway at the intersection of 123 to the George Washington Parkway to accommodate that traffic. Also resurfacing the GW Parkway, resurfacing going into the CIA to take more traffic. What the citizens were concerned with was that they were going to take land and take homes away coming down 123 and Old Georgetown Pike. That compromise has been worked out. Most of the CIA employees live in Northern Virginia. They're good people. They are of the community. So I think the community would be open to look at that, and they have acquired the Scattergood property and other areas out there. And the last consolidation was supposed to be the main consolidation that would take care of all the problems.
Are you suggesting that that may well be a viable alternative?
I think we should look into that, yes, Mr. Schuster.
It also raises the question, if we can do Top Hat in Moscow, maybe we can do Top Hat in Langley. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Recognized by order of appearance, Mr. Richardson. Mr. is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I wonder if both Mr. Moran and Mr. Wolf have any detailed breakdown of the exact number of constituents that both of you have that would be automatically displaced by this move. Is there anything that you have currently or you could provide for the record?
There are 5,000 to 6,000 employees moving. Most live in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, some in the District of Columbia. In the letter that Judge Webster sent back, which I believe the committee has, he says in there, I believe, they do not break it down according to congressional districts.
And your concern is that, is it your estimate that many of these individuals, constituents that both of you have would not make the move to West Virginia because of their roots in your congressional district?
I think most would end up staying in Northern Virginia and commuting the 2 hours each way, particularly during rush hour, because you buy your home. It's the most valuable commodity you have. You have children in the schools. Perhaps you have a child who has a special ed problem or something like that. You have both the husband and wife work and they have a job. You're active in the church or the synagogue. You're active in the PTA. You live in the community. You've just added a new bedroom on for the new child. You just don't move. So the end result is they would do the reverse commute. They would leave Arlington, McLean, the District of Columbia, PG County, and Maryland. And many live over in Maryland and come across the Cabin John Bridge. They would just deadhead out the other way, and there's no mass transit going out there.
One of the things we were told, Mr. Richardson, is by the CIA, I don't know whether this was a public statement, but they said, well, you shouldn't be as concerned because the higher income families are the ones that are going to stay in Northern Virginia. We're going to be moving out the clerical people, the people involved in printing and so on. But their lives, as Mr. Wolf has said so eloquently in the past, are entitled to at least as much consideration and dignity. But it also makes it all the more difficult for them to make that commute of several hours, at least 3 hours a day. It's unfair. And they may even be more dependent upon the social and economic infrastructure here in the region. And none of those families, or you can almost say none of them, are able to live in Northern Virginia without both parents in the workforce. So you've got you may be talking about 5,000 jobs, but you probably 5,000 people, you're probably talking about 10,000 jobs that are being affected. So this has a dramatic effect upon our region, but people's lives are the principal consideration.
If I may add, Mr. Moran is exactly right. The question I asked, what are the pay grades of the employees involved? The answer from Judge Webster is the pay grades of the offices to be consolidated range from wage grade employees to senior officers. We believe the majority would be GS-12s and below, meaning the poorer people that don't worry. It's been said to me that, some of the upper income jobs won't leave. As Mr. Moran said, they would have a harder time. And I think the end result is if I were transferred, I would end up making the commute because my kids could stay in the schools and my wife would have the job.
My last question would be simply, both of you are concerned about the lack of, I know, Mr. Wolf, you mentioned that you were not able to get information from the agency on this move. Is this the case with Mr. Moran also?
Yes, it's in Mr. Wolf's district, and Mr. Wolf was integrally involved in the last consolidation, as he said. I can understand that I might not get as much information as he gets, but if he's not getting any, then I'm completely shut out of the process, and that's
your constituents,
that's our concern. We ought to work with them from the very beginning, and Mr. Wolf normally would take the lead, and we would defer to him as a Washington area delegation because it's in his district, but he hasn't been given the information he needs.
And your constituents within the agency, Mr. Wolf, are also telling you that they're not getting much information either? Is that?
I don't know what information they're getting. We've had anonymous calls from people that are just saying, I don't want my name identified. I don't know what the CIA is telling the employees. I have no way of knowing it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and gentlemen, welcome, and thank you for your testimony. I don't know the gentleman, Mr. Moran, that well, but I do know the gentleman, Mr. Wolf, very well. We came here together, and I want to thank him for the public service that he's doing in this case. It seems to me that if this wasn't so pathetic, it would probably be funny. It would be kind of like watching the Baltimore Orioles or the Baltimore Colts sneak out of town in the back of the truck years ago. But you know, we got some questions for the DCI, and he'll be in here later on. But they've got one other problem. This is not like an instance where we're talking about members who might be inclined to try to grab headlines and do that kind of thing. They are here to answer questions about some very legitimate questions put to them by one of the most constant and level-headed, credible, hardworking members that I've been associated with since I've been here, and that's you, Frank. It's even worse than just a real property debacle, because this kind of a thing casts a pall on the entire intelligence community and everything we try to do. And some people think the Cold War is over, we don't need an intelligence community, and that's just absolutely preposterous. But when you have something as stupid as this, it just casts a shadow on everything legitimately the Intelligence Committee is attempting to do. Now, I've only been on the Intelligence Committee here for 7-8 months. And you're always walking that fine line of trying to do your work here and do the oversight of the Intelligence Committees so that everything they do is not frontline or front page news around the world and thereby thwart their legitimate, sometimes covert, mostly overt activities. But this just it's sad that we would even be here today. And to have Frank go up and asking legitimate questions and to say, well, we haven't made a decision, and 2 weeks later, here is this mega billion-dollar proposition, and I don't know how they're going to pay for it, or, they ought to let, George Bush in on it. Let him know what's going on. I mean, he has a legitimate concern. And the people down at the budget, they might like to know about this. And I don't know how they got themselves in this mess, but I'm afraid it's going to, again, affect everything our intelligence community does. And I thank the gentleman, Mr. Wolf, for bringing this to our attention. And it's unfortunate it couldn't be us who had brought it to your attention, because that would be the more legitimate way to do it. And I yield and look forward to asking some questions later on if we aren't overtaken by base closures on the floor.
Thank you, gentlemen. Would state for the record that although the gentleman has been in contact with the chair for a number of weeks on this, the chair and staff has been following this as soon as the announcement was made, and we initiated the hearing, and although we have invited our colleagues to participate. Gentlelady from Connecticut, Ms. Connelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, we are used to different strategies between the House and Senate. In fact, we are used to competition between the two parties. And Mr. Martin has his football analogy, but I really, looking at this situation and seeing what has developed, I really think what has happened makes a mockery of our traditional process and system that's kept this whole legislative body going forward in the proper fashion for over 200 years. And I thank the chairman for bringing us together. But I can't help but think the way this situation has developed, looking out and seeing our two witnesses, Mr. Wolf, who's an absolute champion for federal workers and has a long history of being their champion, and then having Mr. Moran obviously take up that cause, because as Tip O'Neill has always said, all politics is local, and we're not here for any other reason than to represent the 420,000 people that we are elected to represent. So, gentlemen, I can't help but wonder, if this wasn't done in this way, we're going through a situation right now in the Congress which is very painful, the closing of bases, military bases. In fact, we've got legislation on the floor today to be debated and voted on. I just can't help but wonder, do you think that this was done in this manner because there was a feeling that, of course, there would be some resistance to taking people and uprooting their lives and thinking about a mass movement of individuals. As Mr. Wolf says in his report, or his statement to us, 5,000, 6,000 people. Do you think it was done in this fashion just to avoid all that controversy and then have it a fait accompli, and then nothing could be done about it, and you wouldn't come here as champions of federal workers and their life being kept in order? Could it be that simple, that just it was, hey, we're dealing with the CIA, they keep everything in secret, so why not do this in secret?
Well, I really don't know, but that's the sense that I have. I don't want to question anybody's integrity. That's not really what I was sent here to Congress. I was sent to do what you said, to represent. But I in good faith, went out there over and over and tried. And in the 85 reconsolidation, I actually stood with the agency in opposition to people that lived in my district because of the expansion. And for the first time, we got the CIA to open up their auditorium, and the citizens came in so they could explain. I worked with them on their new child care facility. I don't understand why they did it, and I just asked for information, and the fact that they neglected to tell this whole committee, and I sent a letter to Judge Webster the day that the intelligence bill passed, and then about a week or 9 days later, they did it. I think they should better answer the question. I'm really not sure.
Let me go further on one that Mr. Schuster alluded to. One of the reasons given by the CAA for not considering Loudoun County sites, which were rated highest by their own consultants, is that the county is not favorably disposed to further federal development. Frank, do you pick that up when you go around the...
I do not pick that up. I don't know that the county board of supervisors have ever voted to that effect. I strongly would favor it in Loudoun County. I think that that's relatively close from the CIA Langley headquarters, gone down Old Georgetown Pike or Route 7. You're very, very close. I'm sure with all the land out there and the depressed prices and the number of buildings empty, that would not be the view of the citizens of Loudoun County. So, no, I do not pick that up.
If I could just interject, I was at the Loudoun County Business Forum, Democratic Business Forum. I think that's probably why you weren't invited, Frank. I'm not, but just Friday morning, and we had any number of members of the Board of Supervisors and the business representatives. They were all anxious for more federal presence in Loudoun County. I didn't detect any of that. There's some objection to a western bypass, but that's not really relevant to this. They were very anxious to receive any kind of federal presence they could and would be much appreciative of it.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Mr. Chairman, before I end, I'd like to just address one other thing that maybe you could help me with, that we do have the record correct. Mr. Wolf, in his opening statement, or in his remarks after his opening statement, referred that he did not know that the West Virginia site was not in the original site, and then you had it mentioned in your statement. Now, am I correct that the CIA asked a firm to prepare reports for them, and that they prepared 2 reports? In the first report, they had 65 potential sites, and of that 65 potential sites, they went through a certain set of criteria and picked 10 top sites. There then was, am I correct, a second report. And in that second report, they picked 4 top sites. Of those 4 top sites, 3 of them were of the original 10 in the first report. And 1 site was the West Virginia site, which had not appeared in the previous list. Am I correct in that? Is the record correct that way?
It's my understanding that is correct. I was just asked staff for the numbers on the 65 and the 10, but I believe that is correct. As a matter of fact, for the record as well, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Wolf, has noted a couple times that he sent a letter to the director the day we passed our authorization bill, the 92 authorization bill. In that bill, in the report, we inserted language that passed the House, and it said that the committee is not convinced that the Washington Area Consolidation Initiative has been reviewed adequately and urges the director of the CIA to consider more options than those proposed in the recent consolidation study submitted to the committee. So we made it perfectly clear that we wanted to review this further, we wanted to get further input, but within a matter of days that decision was announced in the press without consultation. So That's the point that I wanted to get
Would the
clarified.
gentlewoman yield on the fourth site, which was in West Virginia and did appear as one of the four in the second report? It's my understanding that while it was included in the second report, the consultant rejected it because of inadequate infrastructure. Is that your understanding?
I don't know.
This is based on internal interviews with the staff, and we'll have an opportunity to discuss this. As a matter of fact, what we might do is keep our questions to the gentleman related to the general issues of the impact of this move. But we're going to have NSA or GSA and the director here hopefully in a few minutes.
But just to wrap this up for myself, Mr. Chairman, I do understand that in the first report, it was commented that the West Virginia site, which was within an hour and 15 minutes drive, that the area was eliminated from due consideration in the first report. So at least we can get that the first report, West Virginia was not in the first report.
And I would say the gentle lady, that staff is informing me that in the second report, the one West Virginia site also was rejected.
Thank you. I just want to make sure before we began, we were clear on that.
Well, and for the record, in order that we have this perfectly clear, in the Legg Mason report, which is the consulting firm hired by the CIA, on page 17 of their report, it says, quote, "While the area around Charlestown, West Virginia does hold some potential for a new REB facility, the consultants determined that requiring a commute of over an hour for almost all existing REB employees would generate a hardship on those existing employees and may result in the loss of key personnel necessary for the operation of a new facility," end quote. And there are other references in this, but that was the one in response. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Young.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and I appreciate the presence of our two colleagues here today. And I'll try to make my questions brief so that we can get on with the other witnesses. But you mentioned the Legg Mason report, and it's pretty obvious from that report that if the original objective criteria had been used, there would have been no West Virginia site even in the top 200 sites. Is that the information that you gentlemen have?
I never saw the Legg Mason report. I can never get a copy. I just heard that when the chairman said that at the outset.
Okay. When the choice was made, it was briefed to the senior CIA managers on May 24th. It was briefed to the DCI on June the 11th, and in the meantime, it became public knowledge, and you gentlemen became involved in the issue. And if I recall correctly, Mr. Wolf, you met with DCI about that time, didn't you?
I met him on a Monday, whatever that would be, and he said it had not come before him and acted like he really didn't know very much about it. That was Monday morning, I believe it'd be June 10th. And it acted like this thing was so far off that, and I thought I made a very persuasive case, and frankly, when I left the CIA grounds, I was under the impression that this was not going to happen.
Well, that was what I wanted to ask. Did you feel that he was knowledgeable on the issue at the time you were there? And number two, did you feel that you educated him while you were there?
Well, I can't say, in fairness to Judge Webster, he said that it had not come before him. I believe his exact words where he said, "It has not come before me as of yet," and it was that Monday. So I would take him at his word that he.
Did you feel that you had adequate time to present your case?
That Monday, yes, I went out there and they listened to me as much as I wanted to say. I went through all the points, and they seemed to. I thought I made a very effective case. It seemed that now, looking back, no matter what I said, that the decision was going the other way.
Can you tell us who else was at the meeting when you met with DCI?
Judge Webster, I believe the Director for Administration, Mr. Hofstetter, and then there was another individual who met me in my car and came up. I don't know his name and stayed throughout the meeting. They can tell you who the other person was.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, that's all the questions that I have at this time. Thank you very much.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, please. While he's changing the role, I would state for committee, I don't intend to cut their question short, although the director has arrived, and we also have GSA, and we have to be out of this room by about 12:30, so if we need to proceed. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman, in view of the fact that we do have the director waiting to come in, I just want to commend both my colleagues for a job very, very well done here this morning. You've certainly enlightened me in some of the facts. I have a number of questions, Frank, but I'm just going to ask one in view of the fact that we have Mr. Webster here. Two questions. After you had your initial meeting with the director, did you at any time have a second personal meeting with him?
No, it was, I did not. It was that Monday, and then it was the following Thursday night about 7:30 or 8 o'clock at home. I got a call from somebody in Congressional Relations saying that they just wanted to tell me that this arrangement had been made. And they said the director couldn't talk to you. And I said, well, I've been home or in my office. And they said, well, we just want to tell you that this decision's been made. So I did not get back to them.
I think if I heard you correctly, Frank, that you were part of the last consolidation, am I correct?
Excuse me, sir?
You were part of the last consolidation?
Yes, I was a major part of it. I think they'll tell you, I recommend that the citizens were opposed to it, that we open up the CIA, bring the citizens in, we open up the auditorium, and we then met with citizen groups. I had a staff member that would meet with the CIA and the citizens for about a year and a half on almost a weekly basis and a monthly basis.
And is it correct to assume that on this one here, particularly this latest one, that you were just cut off and
Yes, totally, yes.
altogether?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentleman. Gentleman from California, Mr. Tellers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First, let me just say that I appreciate your remarks with respect to openness. And I think those comments go far beyond, have implications far beyond this hearing. And I might just say to you that it's refreshing to meet in the open on this committee. Secondly, I would say that I think the gentleman from New York, Mr. Martin, has made a poignant statement that I think has implications far beyond the specific issue that is before the committee today. Thirdly, I make the observation that the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Schuster, when he described the process as disgraceful and scandalous, that in and of itself is an alarming statement. And it means that it says to me that we have a responsibility here to probe very deeply. Let me, secondly, compliment both gentlemen for their diligence and their hard work and very eloquent and detailed presentations. In the interest of time, I only have two questions, one for each of you. To Mr. Wolf, I took a number of notes when you testified because I think the thrust of both of your presentations require us to in turn raise questions with the appropriate people. I think you folks have done your homework. But I just want to make sure, when you commented about environmental impact, Mr. Wolf, is it your testimony that they did not seek any environmental impact studies?
It's my understanding, and I've had a hard time finding out, that they did not.
It's your testimony that they did not?
It's my understanding that they did not. Again, Mr. Dillams, I've had such a hard time finding out data. I did not know the report that was just read, that the chairman just read. Legg Mason study was never given to me, but it's my understanding that they did not.
It's an appropriate question for us to raise with them. I just wanted to clarify. Now, my final question is to you, Mr. Moran, and I took some notes in your presentation, but one comment you made in this gentleman's opinion is very alarming and disturbing. And that went to the issue of people feeling that they had to give you their sense of concern with respect to this consolidation without revealing who they were, because they felt, A, that their jobs would be in jeopardy, or B, that they would in some form or fashion receive reprisals from the agency. That's an alarming accusation. And very disturbing when we're talking about our own government and people who work for an agency feeling frightened of that agency because we ostensibly live in a free and open society, CIA notwithstanding. I would like to get a sense from you as to how pervasive that kind of communication was with you, and Mr. Wolf, if you want to comment, I'd appreciate your comments as well.
Well, they were all very loyal employees that fully accepted the mission of the agency and its...
No, my comment didn't go to that. My comment went to your concern about the impact on their lives.
But to a person, and of course I haven't taken all the calls directly, obviously, it's been staff, letters, and phone calls. None of them have felt free to leave their names because of job reprisals.
Not one?
No, not one.
How about you, Mr.?
I can't speak to that except to say that I met with, of how pervasive that is, I met with a number of former employees working on this and who helped me, and each and every one asked me not to make their name known.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, from California. Jim from Utah.
Just one very brief question to Mr. Wolf, if I might. Frank, the CIA's independent consultants rated Loudoun County as having the highest qualification for this new consolidation, but said they ruled it out because Loudoun County was not amenable to further federal establishments within their boundaries. Do you have any premise for believing that's true? They offered no documentation.
I don't know that, but I don't believe the Board of Supervisors have ever passed on that, and the citizens that I talk to certainly do not feel that way. Loudoun County is in an economic depression, having a very difficult time, and there's land available there, and many of the CIA employees live on the Fairfax County-Loudoun County line and have an opportunity to have it there. So. And the CIA employees are very good people who live in our community, and they are our community. So I don't know the board has ever taken a vote on that, and certainly people have not come up to me and said, we don't want the CIA or any federal agency. The fact is, if the chairman would, when I leave here, I'm going to leave briefly and rush right back because I'm testifying on the Air and Space Museum, which the Smithsonian is placing there, and the citizens of Loudoun County strongly want it, and that's a federal facility. So I don't know that that would be the case. No one has said that to me with regard to the people. I have a note that said the Loudoun Board of Supervisors has not been asked their opinion. I don't know. This is from Pamela Treadwell, and it just says, Frank, the Loudoun Board of Supervisors has not been asked their opinion.
It's your impression they would need it and like it?
I believe they would, yes.
But they have also, if I might interject, just made a tremendous investment in infrastructure to accommodate more development.
Yeah, Route 28. Yeah.
Thank the gentleman, Mr. Wolf and Mr. Moran. Oh, I'm sorry, Bob, I didn't mean to. Okay. Thank the gentleman from California. But I thank Mr. Moran, Mr. Wolf, both for appearing today and for your statements and for your concern. You both have represented your constituencies very well.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for having the hearings, and thank you for all the members staying. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next witness is Mr. Robert DeLuccio, Assistant Commissioner, Office of Real Property Management, Public Building Service of the General Services Administration. And Mr. DeLuccio, and you may introduce your colleague that's with you. And as you know, I think you've been advised, it's the standard procedure for this committee that all witnesses, other than the congressional panel, that all testimony be received under oath. And so if you and any of your colleagues intend to testify at this point, if you'll stand and raise your right hand, I'll administer the oath. You solemnly swear testimony you're about to give us the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm accompanied this morning by Mrs. Hillary Peoples, the Director of Real Estate Operations for the Public Building Service. It's a pleasure for the General Services Administration to have the opportunity to appear before the committee to discuss its role in the planning process for the consolidation of the Central Intelligence Agency activities being considered for Prince William County in Virginia and Charlestown, West Virginia, as well as to address the status of the ongoing dispute over the CIA's non-payment of rent for the CIA headquarters building and Building 213 at the Navy Yard. I will address the issues raised by the committee in the order they were addressed in your letter of invitation to us. First, the extent of GSA's knowledge and participation in the proposed CIA consolidation. CIA has been pursuing its consolidation plans under the authority granted to it under the Central Intelligence Agency Act of '49. GSA has not been formally advised of the CIA's plans for consolidating existing activities in Prince William County in Virginia and Charlestown, West Virginia. GSA has been aware for some time that the CIA had concerns about having its activities scattered among a number of locations outside the Langley headquarters complex, but we have not been asked to assist CIA in planning a consolidation. Although CIA has statutory authority to acquire its own space, GSA is often requested to acquire space on its behalf. Much of the space occupied by CIA in the Washington, D.C. area, other than the Langley headquarters, is leased by GSA. It would be most useful to us if GSA could be made aware of the GSA-controlled locations that are expected to be vacated as a result of the proposed consolidation. With regard to our normal responsibilities in planning and developing projects for federal agencies, most federal agencies, for most federal agencies, GSA plays an important role in planning for their space needs. The largest headquarters agencies are polled annually on their total long-term space needs. CIA is not included in this poll because it is not among the largest agencies. Further, CIA traditionally prefers to conduct its planning in-house due to security reasons. In addition to the headquarters poll, GSA regional offices conduct annual client surveys for all agencies housed in their jurisdictions. Based on information derived from client surveys, on-site GSA surveys, and official client notification of space needs, GSA develops plans for housing federal agencies in the most efficient manner. GSA determines actions that may be required in the community, such as the construction of new government space, acquisition of existing buildings by direct purchase, or acquisition of space by lease, after consideration of agency mission and locational concerns. Under GSA's existing policy, the client agency is responsible for identifying the delineated area best suited for the location of its activities. Location determinations are based on agency mission and require full consideration of applicable laws and regulations. GSA has been working with OMB and GAO to expand this policy to require that agencies include consideration of the following economic factors for major space actions. 1, the availability of reasonable private sector labor pools. 2, consideration of the pay differential for federal employees in high-cost versus low-cost areas. 3, real estate cost, including analysis of the cost of space in metropolitan as well as non-metropolitan areas. 4th, the value of local incentives offered by communities to attract federal activities. And 5, any relocation costs for federal employees and equipment. GSA will provide information on the availability of space and real estate costs to assist agencies in the identification of suitable locations for their activities. Status of the GSA-CIA dispute over the rent for the CIA headquarters building and Building 213 on the Navy Yard is as follows. The current GSA space inventory identifies the CIA as occupying approximately 3 million square feet of space in some 35 government-owned and leased facilities locations. Approximately 99% of the square footage is located in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, with the largest blocks of space being the CIA headquarters in Langley and Building 213 at the Navy Yard. The estimated annual rent charge for CIA space is about $56 million in fiscal year 1991, and about $63 million is projected for fiscal year 1992. According to our records, the CIA has an outstanding debt to GSA of about $76 million in unpaid rent charges for fiscal years 1985 through the present. The unpaid rent charges are for the Langley headquarters complex and Building 213 in the Washington Navy Yard. The buildings are operated by CIA under separate delegation agreements with GSA. CIA and GSA differ as to the proper allowance for operating the buildings. In addition, CIA maintains that all buildings at the headquarters complex are under the custody and control of CIA and therefore not subject to the Federal Buildings Fund rent system. CIA has paid approximately 40% of the assessed charges and withheld the balance pending resolution of the issues I've just described. GSA's and CIA's OMB, Office of Management and Budget Examiners, have been consulted on the dispute. At the present time, both parties are working towards a settlement to provide an equitable reduction in the amount owed to GSA and provide an agreement for future payments. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my oral statement. I appreciate having the opportunity to appear today, and I will attempt to answer any questions you or members of the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. DeLuccio, for your statement and your comments. Mr. DeLuccio, I think just cutting through everything, getting right to the point, if this committee requested of the GSA to review the consolidation plans, whatever they may be, of the CIA in this area, would the GSA first be able to conduct such a review, and would you be authorized if this committee made such a request?
Normally, our role is to provide a space delivery system for federal agencies upon request. In this particular case, we have not been involved and don't have the particulars on the case. It is not customarily, or should I say, ever our role to go in as a reviewer of an agency's transactions, particularly when that agency has authorities of their own to provide space, as it appears that the CIA does have. However, from a technical standpoint, GSA does have the capabilities to deal with and to perform all of the activities required for a consolidation of this nature.
Furthermore, if this committee worked with GSA in establishing guidelines, normal, within the context of your operating procedures, normal procedures or guidelines for either the leasing of real estate or the acquisition of real property, would the GSA be willing to work with us in developing such guidelines?
You're talking in this case particularly for the CIA?
Do you have, well, let me rephrase it then. Do you have standard operating procedures for real estate acquisition?
Yes, we do. Yes,
normal
we do.
Open hearing process,
Yes.
The step-by-step procedures that you normally follow?
Yes, we have. We do have that because we do lease and build and operate a lot of space. We have a set of internal activities by which we conduct our transactions of procurement and so forth. Also, from an authorization process, all of our projects, which exceed $1.6 million, be it a lease and annual cost or repair of an existing building or the construction of a new building, require approval of a prospectus of the Public Works Committees of the Congress. So no project would we proceed with without that authorization. Following that, the appropriations for those kind of projects wind up in line item authorizations to GSA. So from an internal standpoint, we do have a set of procedures by which we operate our procurement, our identification of requirements activities, and from an external standpoint, being the Congress and OMB, there is the authorization process I described.
So short of Mr. Schuster's proposal, which I'm not sure he's made into a proposal yet, to remove the acquisition authority from the CIA, the GSA would obviously make those procedures available to this committee.
Correct. Yes, sir.
For our review. Thank you very much. Mr. Schuster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I presume you have the real property authority for most of the agencies of the federal government. Is that an accurate statement?
That's correct. The administrator of GSA is charged with delivering general purpose type space for all agencies of government.
Thank you. If you were given, if we changed the statute and you were given this authority for the CIA, would you feel capable and competent to handle it?
I think we do have those capabilities, and to point out, for example, their last expansion that was done at the Langley headquarters, this The authorization for that project was handled outside of the procedures I just described, and so was the funding. GSA wound up as the transfer governmental agency to build, design, and build that facility. So we have had experience with them in delivering a lot of their space.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from New Mexico.
Just one question. Mr. DeLuccio, you've been dealing with the Central Intelligence Agency for many years in various capacities. In your judgment, are they capable on their own, with this existing framework, with this consolidation plan taking effect, to effectively carry out this consolidation?
Not knowing much about this consolidation, and again, learning, as was previously stated, about it as conversation and newspaper articles take place, I have to reserve judgment on that question. I really don't know.
Well, I think I have to press you a little further, because you are an expert in logistics and turnaround and management, and my question is, in previous consolidations, would you say that the agency, without others like yourselves and other consolidation agencies, were they able to carry out consolidations effectively?
From a point of determining the requirements for operating the agency and the kinds of space that they need and their locational considerations, the CIA should be equipped, as well as any other agency, to make those determinations. It has been the past experience of GSA that the technical execution of the project, that if it is not done by GSA or initially charged to be done by GSA, that the CIA has wound up with GSA as its technical transfer agent to do that work.
Do you agree that this has been a rather unusual procedure?
I would have, from what I've heard, I would have to agree with that. However, I should hasten to add that we have, as I said in the statement, GSA has known for some time that CIA was not content with the split operation they've had in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, and has for some time had a desire to consolidate. I guess our surprise, and the word unusual, would be our expectations and the information that we had at our regional office. It would be much more longer in range, out in the 2000-year era than the present era.
Rather than this year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman from New Mexico. If I have the committee's indulgence, I just forgot to ask one point that the gentleman raised in your statement, and that is on this back rent issue. You said $76 million unpaid rent charges on the
Yes.
Langley facility in 2013.
Yes.
As I understand it, that is currently being reviewed by OMB.
That's correct.
Has OMB rendered a decision?
They have not. There have been several meetings on the issue, and there is no decision has been rendered at this time.
Okay. But you expect OMB to rule in favor of GSA? Is that?
Well, there's a lot of money involved that we hate to part with. So there may be some compromise of the ways on that issue. But
this committee wants to be sure the CIA pays its bills. So whatever that decision is, will
that issue, that money, I guess, is also as a pawn in the funding for the building, as we generally understand it. Also.
Okay. Very good. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Martin.
I have no questions this time.
Thank the gentleman. Gentlelady from Connecticut, Ms. Kennelly.
Mr. Lucio, you mentioned that many of the buildings that the CIA uses, the ones that are spotted around, usually have the contract for, or does the CIA also contract directly for those buildings?
When it comes to lease space, our records indicate that almost all of CIA's leasing is done through the General Services Administration. It does not appear, although there are many authorities given in the 49 Act as far as building, repairing, altering, renting, it does not appear that the CIA has long-term leasing authority as GSA has. So in most cases, the leases entered into for CIA are done through GSA.
And this also applies to most of the cases that we're talking about where the consolidation would take place?
To my general knowledge, okay, again, lacking the specifics, it is a consolidation away from the leased facilities into a government-owned campus operation. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Gentleman from Massachusetts. gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. DeLuccio, does GSA use consultants in making decisions based on site locations, site preparations, construction, et cetera?
Most of our site acquisition activity is handled in-house. From time to time, we would use a consultant if the matter became complex, but most of it is handled by our in-house employees.
I'm sure you're aware that in this case, the CIA used a consulting firm of Legg Mason.
Yes, sir.
You're aware of that?
I heard that this morning, yes, sir.
And then also, I'm sure you heard that basically the CIA rejected the recommendation of their consulting firm.
Yes, sir.
What is GSA's policy on that? If GSA tends, or the tenant that you're providing facilities for tend to disagree with a consulting firm, how do you handle that?
Well, it's the exception rather than the rule. One would not be bound by the findings of a study commissioned to be done in a particular area, but generally speaking, the purpose of the consultant would be to offer expert advice in the particular area, and generally would be abided by.
The DCI is going to testify later, and we'll ask him some of these same questions, but it appears that the CIA just out of hand rejected the recommendation of their consultant in that their consultant recommended against the West Virginia site and did not list it even in the top 200 potential sites. And you're indicating that that would be unusual for GSA to reject that type of recommendation.
Well, the purpose of a consultant is to provide an advisory technical opinion in the matter at hand. It is not a binding document. I don't want to give the impression that GSA never rejected anything. But generally speaking, the recommendation of the consultant is abided by.
In conversations with representatives of Legg Mason, they seem to assume that there were political considerations made that were involved in the decision that they were not aware of at the time they were making their recommendations. And I understand that we're in the business of politics and political considerations are not unusual. But if the political consideration is detrimental to the overall well-being, then of course that becomes a major concern for all of us, and in this case, specifically the intelligence committees of the House and the Senate. So we can safely assume that you would not have rejected, just out of hand, consultants that you paid considerable fees to.
I think it's a fair assumption, yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentleman. Gentleman from California, Mr. Ellis. Thank you, gentleman. Gentleman from Utah, Mr. Owens.
As I listened to your testimony, Mr. Director, I was impressed that there were a whole number of areas of surprise in this matter, in the manner in which this was handled by the CIA. First of all, you say that you've still not been formally advised of the CIA's plans for consolidation. Secondly, you indicate that you were not asked to assist the CIA in planning a consolidation, whereas thirdly, you're often requested to assist the CIA in acquiring space in the ordinary course of events, and four, that you still are not made aware of any plans to consolidate or to leave existing buildings so to make them available for other of your clients, government clients. This seems extraordinary, all these different ways in which and instances in which the CIA just totally ignored the GSA. Does this have anything, you suppose, to do with the dispute on unpaid rents and Building 213? Is there an antagonism between the agencies?
Well, be clear the record here. We do have a working relationship, an ongoing working relationship with the CIA. We meet with them mostly through our regional office here in the National Capital Region. We have been aware for some time of the discontent of the CIA about the split operation, particularly in the lease space. And we're generally under the belief that there were some long-range plans that perhaps we would eventually be involved in regarding a consolidation. So there's a good working relationship. We also had some other considerations of their Building 213 at the Navy Yard, Southeast Federal Center, if you will. We have a major federal development project going on there, and we were interested in the disposition of that building. So we're interested in some time frames on that building and what their general requirements were for their space. We never got to a point in terms of this specific project that we're talking about today about any of the requirements. With regard to any animosity, I wouldn't say there is that between the agency. I think there is a wholehearted dispute over who has custody and control and authority for the properties. On the one hand is a GSA coming under the rules and regulations that I described, Mr. Schuster on the Public Works Committee spoke about earlier, or is it under the authority of the 49 Act, CIA 49 Act, where in fact they do have authority that was granted to CIA to build, alter, repair, rent, and so forth. So I think it's a basic philosophical kind of a difference. And we now find ourselves in a bit of a dilemma over this rent dispute where the main headquarters building at Langley and Building 213 are being operated as if they're under the custody and control of the administrator of GSA with a delegation agreement where the new building out there, recently built annex, is solely under the jurisdiction, custody, control of the CIA itself, receiving an appropriation for that project outside of our processes. So I think the philosophical disagreement lies in that area and not in a working relationship.
Can you provide the committee with a list of instances in which you have been requested with dates and amounts of space to assist the CIA in obtaining space?
Yes, sir, I could provide that.
Would you do that?
Yes.
Have you done that on a regular basis, as I understand your testimony?
Yes.
Lastly, are you aware, have you had any contacts with the senior senator from West Virginia, Mr. Byrd, or agents or staff operating in that, in his behalf in terms of acquiring or affecting this consolidation?
I have not had any, to the best of my knowledge, no one in GSA has had those contacts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Gentleman from Washington, Mr. Dix.
I have no question.
Thank you. Mr. Lucio, just one final point. It's probably unfair to ask you regarding costs, since this committee has no information related to the cost of this project other than an estimate of the total amount. But in order for us to better assess that, once the committee has greater detail in order to determine whether or not this decision is the most cost-effective decision, we may be again requesting GSA's assistance based on your experience in dealing with other real properties in the region. So I just want to make that request formally.
Fine, thank you.
Mr. Lucio, thank you very much. Ms. Peoples, thank you for, gentleman from Florida.
Just one further question before I
Certainly,
leave.
gentlemen, it's recognized.
Has GSA ever used Legg Mason or Dewberry and Davis as consultants?
I think we have used Legg Mason in our regional operations to do studies. Just what particular study, I can't tell you at this time, but if you're interested in that, I could provide that for the record.
If you would, please, and any indication of whether their work was satisfactory or that it proved to be accurate, et cetera.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Our next witness will be the Honorable Judge Webster. Take just a minute to let him come in. Since we're off the record, Ryan, I want to thank you for letting us use your committee hearing room today. Thank you. It's unusual for you to sit down there. Yeah, I noticed that 2 chairs over, I'm the ranking on his subcommittee on R&D and Armed Services, but could have provided a little more air conditioning today, though. It's getting a little warm in here, isn't it? The spirit of openness, yeah, you like that? Yeah. Good morning, Judge. We apologize for running a touch late here. The other witnesses ran over a little. I believe Mr. Huffsteller and Ms. Rankin, is that correct, will be testifying as well, so you know the procedures. Will stand at this point. You solemnly swear a testimony about to give the whole truth, nothing but truth, so help you God. Thank you very much. Judge, we unfortunately we keep thinking that we're having our last meeting, and it's not that we're trying to get rid of you. We have respect for you and the decision that you've made to leave public office, but it's I guess fortunate that at least you're available to discuss this recent decision on the consolidation plan, and for that we're thankful and appreciate your appearance today. Your statement will be admitted in its entirety in the record, but you're recognized and you may proceed as you wish.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to have this opportunity to speak before the committee and to seek your support for a proposal to consolidate the agency's leased facilities. First, I'd like to provide some background on our proposal. This agency first considered consolidating outlying facilities back in 1956, and at that time we realized that the headquarters building being constructed at Langley would be only a partial solution to the agency's space problems. We've been trying to catch up ever since with mixed success. The most recent chapters of this story go back a decade, when we planned the new building on our headquarters compound. We had 16 external buildings that we intended to consolidate, and although we had expected our levels to remain stable, pressing intelligence requirements in the 1980s led to our unprecedented growth. And as a result, even after moving into the new building in our headquarters compound, we still occupied some 21 leased facilities. We then tried to consolidate at a site in Reston, but we were unable to negotiate a satisfactory agreement with the developer. Soon after that, our Inspector General completed a survey of the agency's office space and concluded that many of the seriously overcrowded areas at headquarters were what was called dysfunctional. I directed that the agency try to meet the standard GSA space allocation of about 125 square feet per workstation. By way of comparison, we now average about 106 to 108 feet per station at headquarters. We then received congressional direction to develop a long-range space plan that would contain our long-term facility costs. Our plans have always had the goal of consolidating to enhance our operational efficiency, our security, and to contain long-term facility costs. We've been assisted in our efforts by two outside firms, a real estate consulting firm and an architect and engineering firm. We have melded their views with our own operational and managerial concerns to develop the proposal that we're presenting to you today. In creating this proposal, we provided these consultants with our own site selection criteria. We told them we needed a parcel of land of up to 700 acres, but no less than 250 to 500 acres. A location within a 75 minutes non-rush hour drive from the headquarters compound and within 60 minutes of a major airport. Adequate access to utilities and transportation networks. And we wanted a site without difficult topographic features or environmental sensitivities that would place constraints on our project. Our consultants screened some 700 sites. Most were identified from tax maps and county records, while others were brought to our attention by people seeking to do business with the government. Over time, these sites were narrowed down to 4, which we analyzed in greater depth. After comparing their relative advantages, we concluded that 2 sites, one in Jefferson County, West Virginia, and one in Prince William County, Virginia, would best meet our diverse long-term needs and have the greatest likelihood of obtaining local support. The agency intends to continue to concentrate the majority of its workforce, the Directorates of Intelligence and Operations, and most of the DCI's staffs on the headquarters compound. And this will facilitate their daily interaction with each other and with the policy community. Over time, we would like to move as many computers and related equipment off the headquarters compound as possible in order to make more space available for personnel. We propose consolidating some of our scientific and technical and administrative personnel on the Prince William County site. This segment of our population requires traditional office space. They interact with headquarters regularly but not daily, and they travel frequently. The Prince William County location is about 35 minutes from headquarters, about 25 minutes from Dulles, and is the most developed of the sites we considered, making it very suitable for this portion of our workforce. It also would provide the flexibility to accommodate the National Photographic Interpretation Center sometime after the turn of the century, if GSA's redevelopment plans for the Southeast Federal Center required us to do so. We propose concentrating our special purpose and light industry units in Jefferson County, where about 500 acres of modestly priced land is available. We believe the size and relatively low cost of this property make it an ideal location for our information handling and printing activities. It is within 70 minutes of headquarters, which we consider acceptable for people with less than daily interaction with headquarters. It's about 50 minutes from Dulles and 20 minutes from a local commercial airport. The possibility of moving computer centers to this West Virginia location over time would free up prime office space in the headquarters compound for those who would benefit most from daily interaction with the DO, DI, and the policy community. In time, this location would also accommodate our expansive warehouse operations, which we may need to relocate sometime during the next 10 to 15 years. We expect these plans will have a marginal impact on our employees. The majority already live in the triangle bounded by Leesburg, Manassas, and Falls Church, and they are slowly moving further west, north, and south to find more affordable housing. Today, most employees are within a 45-minute commute to headquarters and the Prince William County site, and within 1 hour of the Jefferson County site. We think few will have to relocate, but some may choose to do so, to take advantage of the affordable housing opportunities available in the distant suburbs. If they do move, they will have 7 to 8 years to make their plans. We believe that over the longer term, this is a cost-effective program. We estimate that our proposal would cost about $1.2 billion over an 11 to 12-year period. By the end of the year 2006, just 15 years from now, our proposal would be several $100 million less costly than continuing to lease, to renovate, and supplement our current external facilities. And spiraling lease costs will continue to increase that difference each year. By the year 2010, we believe the program will have paid for itself. Mr. Chairman, before I conclude, I'd like to say a few words about the interaction with the Congress that has taken place in connection with the proposal that we are presenting today. As you know, early last year, the Intelligence Committees directed us to come up with a plan for reducing out-year costs of meeting the agency's space requirements. We briefed the House and Senate Intelligence and Senate Appropriations leaderships on our preliminary proposals in the summer of 1990. Last fall, the Defense Appropriations Act earmarked funds for us to continue our studies and to report back to the concerned committees by this February. An interim report was completed in February and made available to the Intelligence and Appropriations Committees. In April, we briefed additional interested members or their staffs, including Senators Warner and Robb and Congressmen Wolf and Slaughter. Consolidation options were reviewed by the agency's Executive Committee in May. I met personally with Congressman Wolf early in June to discuss the issue. And shortly thereafter, the final recommendations were presented to me. Because Senator Byrd had been instrumental in providing funding for the studies, I met with him at his request to inform him of our proposal. Senator Byrd was concerned that we not miss the opportunity for the fiscal year 1992 Intelligence Authorization Bill to provide for implementation of the proposal, and he asked me to meet with Senators Warner, Boren, and Murkowski. This meeting took place on June 20th, and Senators Warner and Byrd issued a press release that same afternoon. This action was much faster than I had anticipated, and I would naturally have preferred to have kept this committee more closely informed. You will recall that my staff contacted your staff director and minority counsel at home. Staff contacted your staff director and minority counsel at home that evening to ensure that the leadership of this committee was made aware of what had transpired at the meeting with the senators. I tried unsuccessfully to call Congressman Wolf. My staff did manage to find him at home and provide the same information to him. In summary, Mr. Chairman, there's been a continual process of congressional involvement in the development of this proposal. I do regret that statements to the press were made before we could fully brief this committee on our final proposal, but that was not a matter fully within my control. In any event, there clearly was a determination to ensure that the matter was dealt with in the Intelligence Authorization Bill, and no effort at all to bypass or in any way diminish the role of this committee in the process. At this point, Mr. Chairman, I'd be very pleased to have that process continue by answering whatever questions you have or the members of the committee may have. I have with me, as you noted today, the agency's Deputy Director for Administration, Ray Huffstatler, and Ms. Diane Rankin, the Acting Chief of the Facilities Management Group, Office of Logistics. And I'd be glad to go on from there, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Judge. Well, Judge, I appreciate your comment that the senators were interested in not missing the 92 authorization cycle. However, it should be noted that since this was not in a request for the 92 authorization bill, nor was this committee informed of your decision or the fact that you were going to be forwarding a proposal in the short term, that proposal was not even considered before this committee. I think that really comes down to the question of the urgency for this decision. And as you recall, in our authorization report, just recently passed, May the 15th as a matter of fact, we highlighted to you our concerns about pushing forward with this area consolidation. And I refer to you two paragraphs within that report that indicated that, as we've stated here, we're obviously not opposed to consolidation. We've actually encouraged it when it makes sense. Provided that the analysis conducted to support such an endeavor is sound and the move will produce cost-effective results. The committee requests that the DCI undertake a community-wide review of facilities and activities to determine if consolidation should take place and whether the need for area consolidation, specifically be the DIA and CIA, is warranted based on other community requirements. So that's an area-wide, that's a community-wide statement to you. Also, in the report, we indicated the CIA is considering a proposal to consolidate all of their Washington area facilities at one location. The committee is not convinced that the Washington Area Consolidation Initiative has been reviewed adequately and urges the director of the CIA to consider more options than those proposed in the recent consolidation study submitted to the committee. Mr. Director, how did you or your staff interpret this language, and why didn't it affect you in your notification process to the committee concerning the consolidation? It's not as if we weren't on record indicating that we felt it should be broader, that it was not done adequately, and that we should have a full layout of the proposal before us.
Mr. Chairman, I want to acknowledge right off the bat that this committee has been at the forefront of urging us to solve our space problems and to do it with a range of options. The problem for me was that the authorization bill from the House had already gone forward by the time that the proposal reached my desk for briefing and decision. We will be pursuing a community-wide space problem. Historically, in the past, those problems have been addressed by the individual departments within their individual space capabilities. And I agree that a broader look needs to be taken and one will be taken. Unfortunately, I won't be here to see it through, but that is a commitment to you. The interim report came down, as you know, and I believe it was made available to you. A second report was submitted to us by the combined report by the architects and the real estate people. And the executive committee of the agency met a number of times to consider those proposals. And in fact, they had not made a recommendation to me at the time that Congressman Wolf came to see me, and I did not know what that recommendation was going to be. The heart of the recommendation, based on the realization as they went forward that they'd been looking at places out in West Virginia for a long, long time. I think back in the early, at least as 88, 1988, they were starting to look at the cost benefits from land and other considerations, but were deterred by the fact that the travel distance for so many people who needed to interact on a regular basis might be a serious problem. And looking at what we would be moving to West Virginia, the realization we're really dealing with two populations within the agency: those who did not need to interact on a regular basis and who were in charge of facilities such as printing, for example. It did not need to be on agency compound, and the realization that perhaps two compounds was a better approach to this. This is, I think, consistent with your instructions in charge to look at a range of other options. So this was the proposal that was made to me, and it was made after you had already sent forward your authorization bill. It has always been my view that you had full control over this process, because we were not going to have a building that this committee did not support and approve. The question was whether or not we needed to get on the bandwagon to get this thing started, or whether we wanted to wait yet another year with all the attendant costs and dysfunction that went with it.
Mr. Director, it's been clear to me, and I think to this committee for some time. As a matter of fact, in the 88 report, at my insistence, I included some language that indicated that raised my concern about the process under which the agency was operating for acquisition, leasing, etc. And we said, quite frankly, that the agency lacked the necessary procedures or mechanisms to arrive at a cost-effective solution. We're talking about previous consolidations. Mm-hmm. We're not talking about a covert action here. We're talking about a $1.3 billion, 1.2, whatever the numbers are, consolidation, real estate, that obviously is not an emergency. It's not. It may be urgent in your mind, but as far as having an effective policy in order to get the wisest decision. I mean, this decision is going to affect the future of the agency, perhaps as no other construction decision made, because you are going to affect the lives of your and well-being of your personnel and the morale, and this is going to have a tremendous effect. Even under a covert action, minimum we get the Gang of Eight. We didn't even get the Gang of Eight here. We're talking about being slipped in at the last minute, and I understand trying to get on the bandwagon and someone else may be driving that wagon, but it's clear that there was not a normal process followed. I'm concerned about the process. This consolidation, it's important. It's an incredibly big decision for the community and this Congress. But at the same time, there has to be an underlying process. The gentleman from Pennsylvania has already indicated to previous witnesses, perhaps if the CIA cannot get its procedures under control, that maybe that authority for acquisition ought to be given to the GSA. So I guess my question would be to you is, what would be lost, in your view, if this committee decided to hold up on the initial acquisition in order to have a review of the decision that was made and have that done in consultation with the GSA, CIA, OMB. OMB didn't even know about it. Their letter to us says they're not familiar with the plan, and it wasn't a formal request. Is there anything, in your opinion, that would be lost from a slowing down of the process? You say you missed the bill. You missed it by 9 days. I mean, you could have told us. We might have reserved a little space in there. But what would be lost if it was slowed down?
I can't give you any precise dollar amounts. I think that we've already demonstrated, and you've been the first to recognize and prod us to move forward on dealing with our space problems. I think we have an ongoing space problem, and we have an opportunity here where real estate prices are depressed, and that has been important to us to take advantage of low prices. I can't tell you that real estate prices are going to soar in the next year, but I think it is another call to make considered judgments. I would hope that the committee would support the effort to acquire the land, which is what the basic authorization is. It isn't new money. It's authorization to go ahead and acquire the land. If our judgment is second-guessed by a more detailed and elaborate process, we'd be in a position to make changes as appropriate. But
Judge, I think the concern we have is, normally, like this committee, we operate in a classified setting. But there's no reason to operate in a classified setting here. There's no reason to have this decision clouded or cloaked in secrecy. Is it not in the interest of the CIA, you talk about depressed real estate prices or lower prices, to have a more open, competitive environment in which local incentives might actually be provided that in the long term may be more cost effective? Give an example. Whether it was a private decision like United Airlines, we had states enacting, the city of Oklahoma City was one, enacted a sales tax to provide the land and facilities to facilitize it for this agency, for this company. Florida was involved. Virginia, Dulles Airport was involved. Large amounts of tax state dollars provided in order to incentivize the location. One community in my district gave 100 acres on an airport to a company at no charge. $10, I think, was the cost. Now, that's not $10,000 an acre for 500 acres. That is a community that's openly working to attract industry or economic development. Now, if that's the same in Oklahoma, I'm sure it's the same in other areas. Either it's the East Coast because of the depressed economy here, or elsewhere in the country. And I'm sure in Pennsylvania and elsewhere they can make you those kinds of offers. It's actually discussing the open process. I can assure you, I can get you international airport land cheaper than you've got right here. Now, it may not be 75 minutes, but it is travel times in the central part of the United States. This process needs to be more open, because I think the CIA can get a better deal. And that's what we're talking about. If your budgets are tight, and they're going to be tight, let's not make a decision now, rush into a decision, and say, let's purchase the land without having seen some of the options out there. So that would be my recommendation, and I think this committee will review a number of considerations. But I wanted to get from you, why you felt that, one, it was so urgent, and secondly, why it could not be conducted in an open and more competitive environment.
Do you want to respond to the competitive environment issue?
We have not signed any purchase arrangement with any site owners. That would obviously be inappropriate until we had approval and funding from the committees. What we would intend to do to get at your concerns, and we have underway at the moment, is to conduct appraisals of comparable properties in the areas to ensure that we would certainly get the best deal possible for the U.S. taxpayer. If we were unable to negotiate an arrangement that we felt was reasonable, we would not go through with that arrangement and we would look at other sites.
Well, that still didn't respond to the question, with all due respect. Perhaps even this hearing will drive the cost down a little bit in some of that.
We would appreciate that.
Yeah, but it's clear that it could be done in a more open manner, and that there is not an urgency associated if there are incentives out there. In fact, the matter is, with again all due respect to the office that has been handling this within the agency and your consultant, if your consultant makes recommendations and they have been rejected and done so in not an open fashion, then that raises the specter that there were other considerations, and there is no need for that at this point. So I think the credibility of the process, one, will be enhanced. Two, will be more cost-effective if it's in a competitive environment. And three, you'll have an opportunity for input from not only your employees, but citizens involved as well. And lastly, I hope the taxpayer is the one who benefits from this decision. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Judge, we have numerous questions here in writing, and I fear that we're not going to be able to ask all of them because of time constraints, so I would ask if we will provide them to you, and can you respond in writing to all the questions which we have not covered here today? And would you be able to give us those responses by September 1st of September?
Certainly.
Thank you. Judge, we were told that when you were briefed by people in the agency who used briefing charts which described and supported the decision. We asked for those briefing charts so we could understand the basis of the decision, and the CIA denied this committee access to those briefing charts. Why?
My understanding is that these charts constitute internal decision memoranda, which are traditionally not supplied to the Congress because they are the materials that go into a decision. Once made, the decision has to be justified, but not.
Is there anything in those charts that you would not want us to see?
Nothing in the charts that I would not want you to see.
Well, then why can't we have them?
Well, I'd said there's a traditional position by the executive branch that internal decision memoranda are not regularly made available. That's historically so. There's nothing in there that I would not want you to see.
Well, it certainly makes them suspect, Judge, given the circumstances shrouding this whole covert operation.
Make a formal request. Ask me now.
Yeah. So the chairman joins me in making a formal request that these charts be provided to us.
All right, Mr. Schuster and the Chairman, we will review that and give you a response.
How soon do you think you'll be able to respond? The next 48 hours?
Well, I for one want to consult the Office of the Counsel of the President.
Before Friday of this week, when Congress is scheduled to recess? Friday of this week. Yeah. Yes, for 5 weeks.
We have the charts. It's a question of the President.
Yeah, I just want to consult the White House on it.
They'd like to know what's in the plan.
Thank you. Yeah, well, yes, I understand they don't know what's in them either, so they might be interested.
Okay.
Our staff was informed that in a recent discussion with the Deputy Director of Administration, who's with you today, he stated that political considerations were a factor in the decision-making process. Would you please describe precisely what those political considerations were?
Who made that statement?
The discussions that we had with the staff, we reviewed a number of considerations that went into the decision. One was operation.
No, I'm interested in what the political considerations were.
Political considerations included zoning, the ability to get support from the local community, and the receptivity of the local authorities to having a large complex of several hundred acres in their area.
Did this
and
include,
to having that taken off the tax roll.
Did this include any political considerations with regard to the Congress?
That was not a part of my statement, no.
Well, my question is, in the decision-making process, were there any political considerations relative to the Congress?
I don't know how to answer that. There are questions of trying to get congressional support for funding of any project that we come with. And in that sense, yes, all of our proposals have a political dimension. But there is no chicanery, if that's what you are referring to, that entered into any of the considerations in choosing those options.
The consultant told us that the West Virginia site, based on your own criteria, would not have made the top 200 sites. In fact, the January 1991 Legg Mason report specifically eliminated Jefferson County, West Virginia, from consideration because of its lack of major highway access and its distance from both the existing headquarters facility and residence of CIA employees. It even cited potential loss of key personnel if such a site were considered. So it's not as though your consultant overlooked the West Virginia site. He looked at it and then specifically excluded it. Why then did you make the decision to include this site as a final site for consolidation?
My understanding that was at the time that judgment was made in the first preliminary report, the consultants were considering West Virginia as a site for the entire single site compound, which would include a lot of the people who would be, as I mentioned in my opening statement, inconvenienced by the distance, and did not consider the possibility of a separate population and separate compounds, putting in West Virginia those people who did not interact on a regular basis with headquarters.
In the second report, I guess April of '91, the consultant report supposedly was a further refinement of the top 4 sites, and here the West Virginia site creeps in. Who told Legg Mason to include the West Virginia site as one of the sites, and what were the circumstances surrounding its inclusion?
We didn't tell Legg Mason to include the West Virginia site in their conclusions. As the judge mentioned earlier, we had a set of criteria that we gave the consultants. That included that we wanted to look at an area within 75 minutes driving time to headquarters.
There was no suggestion by anyone at CIA to Legg Mason that this particular site should be considered.
That's correct. What we did ask them, they on their own made the judgments that you were referring to earlier. They chose to concentrate on closer in sites. We're looking at the year 2000. We're trying to build for the future. We're aware that our new employees coming on board excuse me, are having a difficult time finding affordable housing in our closer in areas.
Well, even when the consultant analyzed the West Virginia site, for whatever reason, they did not recommend it as highly as the other 3 sites, but it was selected anyway by CIA. Why?
You're correct. Among the 4, they did not rank that the highest for a consolidation at one site. In conversations with the consultant after their studies, when we explained to them how we went through the thought process of realizing that our population really represented 2 different segments, and that we were thinking in terms of concentrating one type of activity in the Charlestown area and the other type in the Prince William area, They said that if we had segmented our population to them in the beginning, they would have come up with a similar solution. And in fact, that's what much of private industry is doing now. It just makes economic sense to concentrate activities that require a lot of land, to put them where land is less expensive, and to save the more expensive land for those that really need it. In our case, those that we felt had to interact more often with our people in headquarters.
My time is up, Mr. Chairman.
But actually, I wanted to, if the gentleman yield on that point. The gentleman's first question was, between the first study and the second, did the agency, did you or anyone else within the agency direct Legg Mason to add or go back and review the West Virginia site? If it was not included in the first site, it was not made the top 200 list, and they concentrated on the 65. In the interim, between the first and second reports where they selected the 4,
Right.
you made a decision to bifurcate or separate the facilities. Is that correct?
It was such an interactive process, I can't pinpoint the time. My best answer to your question is, we didn't say go include that site in the 4. What we did was say that we respectfully disagree with your conclusion that we should concentrate only in closer in areas. We would like to make sure that we look at all the possibilities. Please agree with our original criteria of 75 minutes out and make sure we haven't overlooked anything. In the process of doing that, they looked at a number of other sites, and the 4 in the second report were the 4 that emerged as those deemed most suitable for what we were trying to do.
One final point. I just want to be sure there's no misunderstanding here. Is it your testimony, all 3 of you, that nobody suggested or implied to Legg Mason that they should include the West Virginia site?
That's right.
That's correct.
The answer is that from the outset, we considered West Virginia as a potential area, and we wanted it investigated. And that started back in 1988, long before we even engaged Legg Mason.
If I can take up on this one point, who is Mr. Bob Hawk and Mr. Esterly?
Mr. Esterly is our former Director of Logistics. Bob Hawk is an architect in our Office of Logistics.
We have been told that Mr. Hawk and Mr. Esterly specifically directed the consultant to include the West Virginia site. Were they in a position to do so? They met regularly with the consultant.
Again, I think we asked them to consider all possible sites within the 75-minute radius to ensure that we were not overlooking something that would meet our needs.
So the answer is they could have, whether it was a specific direction or at some time during this process, they could have indicated to the consultant that the agency would like for them to consider this specific site in West Virginia. I mean, if you don't know the answer, don't answer. But if you do, then that's...
The answer that, as I understand it, Mr. Chairman, is that we instructed them to look at the area in West Virginia, and that they looked at a number of sites. Now, if you differentiate between the site that ended up in the study and the West Virginia area...
I think the boundaries of the state are probably the primary consideration here by some people.
We asked them to look at areas in West Virginia. We did not tell them to pick this site or to look at this site specifically.
Sure. So I can just proceed here. When you originally hired the consultants, they were under the impression that you were to consolidate under one site. That was their impression. After they came back with the first original report, that is the time when you decided, the agency, that now we need 2 different locations. Am I correct?
No.
Please clarify that for the committee.
It's very difficult to pinpoint periods of time. We've been involved in an effort going 2 years, where it's constantly, we go in this direction, we learn information we refine our thinking, we lean a little bit in that direction. Between the first study and the second study, we were starting to have informal conversations with the target populations that would be affected, the management of those components. As we did that, we were asking them if they would effectively operate from this site or that site. And in those conversations, the line of thought that I talked about earlier became prominent, and that is, that was how we evolved into the
I'm not
two.
making any allegation here, but
Yes.
let me
Oh, I'm
just...
trying to explain to you
Yeah,
how we
but
came
let me
to
try to
that
explain to
decision.
you also. I think it's very important for the committee to understand. It says here the Legg Mason officials, they originally were under the assumption that only one site would be chosen for the entire consolidation. They were under that assumption. Sometime between the issuance of the two reports, someone in the CIA decided to go with a hybrid decision, consolidation at two sites. What happened between when you first want to consolidate under one site, which I think is ideal personally, I'm not an expert in the field, when you get a report back, and suddenly you direct them to go to a particular site in West Virginia.
We did not suddenly direct them to go to a particular site in West Virginia. During this time period, we had continually people bringing sites to our attention. As people want to do business with government, they call, we send them a package, they fill it out. As they did that, we would take a look at that. If we thought it might have promise for fulfilling our requirements and might not have been considered by Legg Mason, we passed it over to them and said, factor this into your thinking. Perhaps what you're interpreting as look at this particular site falls into that category. We did not direct them to come up with any particular 4 sites for their final selection.
They looked at 21 in West Virginia.
I thank you.
Gentleman from New Mexico is recognized.
Well, I'm trying to get an answer.
I think the question is, when did you change your position from one side to two sides? That should be simple to...
Okay.
Somebody had to make that decision. When did they make it?
Well, I think I made the decision because it came to me, Congressman Dix, in a recommendation from the Executive Committee. I think the Executive Committee's recommendation was for 2 sites after having reviewed all the reports and considered it separately. They also presented alternative proposals for a single site and the costs and problems associated with them, such as overburdening a particular area of the community, and the high cost of real estate in one area versus the lower cost in another area.
They had to start at some point
Yes.
looking at 2 sites
That's right.
prior to the time when they came to. So could you clarify when you started to look at 2 sites? When did this become a viable option?
I would put that in the time frame of March to April. As the consultants...
This year.
1991. As the consultants were doing their study, they would meet with us biweekly, and they would tell us where they were in their thinking. We did individual analysis on our own as they were doing theirs. We didn't want to color what they were doing. We separately started to think in terms of 2 sites, I would say in that March-April timeframe, as I was telling your colleague, when we started to get feedback from our components and realizing it just seemed to make a lot of sense to concentrate one kind of activity in one area and another kind of activity in another area.
But the point is, again, the study itself, hiring of Legg Mason and others, was directed by the Senate. Was that not true? There was appropriated monies directing a study of the review.
They made funds available for us to use in our planning process, yes.
During this process, since they appropriated the funds, were there discussions between that committee and the agency in reference to where sites were or the bifurcation of sites?
We provided an interim report in February. At that time, we were still thinking in terms of one site, and that report reflects that. I'm trying to recall. We've had staff discussions with people in between. We did not tell staff at that time that we were thinking of 2 sites because we had not presented it to our own management and they hadn't made that decision yet.
But the point is, there were discussions between Senate staff and the agency during this time frame on the study that they funded
We also
in
had
order to
discussions
determine the
with your
site
staff,
location.
I believe.
I'm sorry?
We had discussions with your staff as well. When we started this effort, or when we reached this phase of this effort, the director met, I believe, with your predecessor and the chairman of the Senate. That was in July. Following up on that, Mr. Huffstetler and another group of my colleagues went down and briefed both Senate and HPSI staff. I believe Mr. Fitch was present at that time. Then they asked for a follow-up session. The Senate side did. Your staff wasn't planning to send anyone there, and we called and asked that you did, and somebody, unfortunately, who's no longer with your staff was the person who attended that session in August. So we have tried to inform all of the people that we thought were appropriate as we've worked our way through this process.
The gentleman from Washington wants to follow up on this point.
Did the Senate staff recommend 2 sites?
No.
This was an internal agency
These
thought.
are our recommendations, yes.
I mean, but did they recommend to you? Did they say to you, why don't you look at 2 sites?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Gentleman from New Mexico.
Mr. Chairman, I will briefly yield to Mr. Dellums, who I understand has a time commitment problem.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, I do have a conflict in a long-standing meeting, but I wanted to ask 3 questions, and I appreciate my colleague for yielding. First, Judge Webster, you indicated in your opening remarks that you wanted to find a site, and I quote, that had minimal environmental constraints. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Wolf, indicated in his testimony that to his knowledge, no environmental impact study had been carried out. I'm just going to raise the question. You can answer them later. My question is, have any environmental impact studies been conducted? Number 2, my question goes to the issue of prematurity. In response to the question from the chair, you indicated that a community-wide consolidation review was, at this present moment, an ongoing process. But my question is, could a reorganization and restructure of the intelligence community based upon that consolidation review have any impact on facilities consolidation? And if the answer to that is yes, then is this process or this decision grossly premature? Seems to me illogical to move forward on land acquisition when you haven't even carried out that particular process. To the gentlewoman, and I'm sorry I don't recall your name, I wrote a quote that you just made. We're trying to build for the future. My question, Judge Webster, goes directly to that issue. Have you conducted any studies on your personnel and space requirements beyond the year 2000, since it is about that time that this consolidation would take place? You and I realize that the world has changed, the world continues to change, because that's an ongoing and dynamic process, and that change is going to have some impact on the personnel, the size, the direction of that agency. So based on that force structure, the agency will, it seems to me, have to necessarily change with it. Have you done any studies that would allow you to project beyond the year 2000? And how do you know your assumptions are correct if you've not done those studies? And would you provide the committee with any internal studies that you've done to support your consolidation proposal that's before the committee today? And Mr. Chairman, I'd appreciate it if you, sir, with your brilliant mind, would follow up on these questions since I have to leave. And I would thank the gentleman from New Mexico.
Be happy to. Thank the gentleman from California. Judge, you want to respond to those that you can, and if necessary, we'll follow up in the record.
With respect to the environmental impact, I'm not aware of any environmental impact statement. The experts who were asked to review the sites considered environmental constraints, primarily wetlands area that would interfere and require special activity. And their report you have before you, so you know what their conclusions were. The we have not yet gotten underway with the request for a full space requirement study of the intelligence community as a whole. That will be done. I cannot really believe that any conclusions that would flow from that would materially affect a decision to go forward to acquire ground for these facilities. It's possible, but I can't conceive of it. The third question was, have we considered the changing world and our future needs? I am told, and I was told in the briefing, that these space requirements took into account, as best we can, the changing requirements for intelligence and positions, and there were adjustments made in their calculations for that. As we go forward into the planning and design of the buildings and in the two locations, we will of course be working with the oversight committees, and that will be a question foremost on your mind and on ours of whether it's realistic for the direction that we're going.
Thank you, Judge. Gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Rankin, it seems there's some dispute over who consulted whom, and I'm going to ask for some specific dates. And I'm talking about between February 19th, 1991, and June 10th, 1991. Did the agency consult with any member of Congress, member of the Senate, committee staff, on the status of the consolidation plan? If so, who was in contact, when, and for what purposes? Now, realize some of this you may want to provide for the record, but I have to be very specific between these two dates.
What were those dates?
February 19th, 1991, and June 10th, 1991.
Between that time period, we had provide briefings on request to Congressman Wolf, to a staffer of Senator Robb, to Congressman Mollahan, to Congressman Slaughter, to Senator Warner. I believe those are briefings we were asked
But
for.
nobody from this committee, member or staff, was part of that consultation process.
And our,
Let's see.
Yes.
1991, I would have. No, that's in 1990.
that's correct. I wouldn't describe it as a consultation process.
It was in response
We were
to-
asked to provide briefings on the status of our planning efforts, and that's what we did. And during that time, we also had similar sessions with our OMB examiner.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
That was a question, Mr. Chairman, that I was going to get into, and it's because of something Ms. Rankin had said earlier. I've spent a certain amount of time on this, and the staff has also, and we have a consolidation of key dates. And you did just previously mention that you had briefed the staff of the Select Committee of Intelligence of the House. And in our consolidation of key dates, you do have summer 1990 briefing for the House Intelligence Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee staffs on CAI consolidation plans. These were the early stages. This was before any site was chosen, let alone the fact that two had been later decided upon. And as you go down here, I would like my colleague to realize that that's exactly the last time this staff was briefed. And I say that because the purpose of this hearing is to raise questions on the recent planning and decision-making by the CIA, in which we have this hearing because we feel we were totally left out of it. So I wanted to make sure, Ms. Rankin, that it was noted that our staff had not been briefed except broadly in summer of 1990.
No, Ms. Judge, again, I think we can belabor this point, and you've been a very good official for this country, and I hate to be in a position to keep beating up on the agency, but I guess my question in a very gentle way is, what makes you think that the agency has this expertise to make consolidation decisions when you've tried in '87 to consolidate and it didn't work? You tried the Reston plan, that didn't work. You were supposed to consolidate, and now you have
2 sites, your consultant moves ahead and recommends something different. You did not call in the GSA. OMB has sent us a letter saying they were not part of this decision that deals with costs. I mean, what the CIA has expertise in a lot of areas, and very positively so, but on matters of logistics, rents. Ms. Rankin, I understand you're from the DI division.
I started there, yes.
And this is logistics, right?
That's
I mean,
right.
this is, I mean, what makes you think, Judge, that you can make decisions like this without the kind of scrutiny that is needed?
I rely on the recommendations of my senior officials who have in turn reviewed the outside recommendations and discussed it internally. The Office of Logistics does have a number of executives, and Mr. Hofstadter can describe them in detail to you. I also rely on congressional oversight, and I have no intention of trying to make any kind of a move that would not be subject to your very careful review of an area this size.
Well, Judge, in light of what we've heard at this hearing, in light of the chairman's views and the ranking minority views, does it not make sense to put this decision on hold?
You can make strong arguments for that, and strong arguments have been made. I think there are equally compelling ones in the interest of time, that a year is a long time to wait, and there are opportunities here to be had in terms of acquisition values. And that's the part that I think is clearest to me. What kind of buildings and where we are going to go will all be carefully reviewed. If we have made it, if you believe that, which I do not, that we've made an error in judgment, even the acquisitions can be changed. But it has seemed to me an opportunity to go forward with acquiring the ground. That's where I came out in making my recommendation.
Judge, our view is that this has not had adequate scrutiny, and it may be the right decision, but it's been made by a very narrow group of people, and all the factors have not been taken into account, not to mention the fact that this committee has been totally kept in the dark. And
Didn't you receive our interim report in February?
Yes, I believe we did.
But mere paper shuffling while you're meeting with those staff is not a sufficient answer, Ms. Rankin. That does not cut it, quite frankly. And Judge, with all due respect, we're not challenging you, but your senior staff has let you down on this issue. If you relied on them, then it's not been sufficient. They have not served you well. They have not served the agency well on this decision. And as to the point of delaying decision and a waste of a year, you have the opportunity to request a reprogramming to come to us for an acquisition at some point down the road. That does not mean if we delay the decision in order to have further review of how the process was conducted, that you could not come back within a short period of time, fully lay this out in more open fashion, and have the opportunity to take advantage of real estate prices or whatever.
Mr. Chairman.
Would the Chairman yield? I would also point out that Ms. Rankin refers to the interim report of February. The interim report was essentially irrelevant when compared with the final decision. The final decisions were entirely different from the interim report. Had we relied on the interim report, we would have been as astonished as we are today.
Mr. Chairman.
May
I add to Mr. Schuster's remark, the interim report, 9 sites reduced to 4. If you read that interim report, you would have thought that the West Virginia site was in the first report site. Now, Mr. Webster, with all due respect, you say we need oversight, but when someone sends us a report that's the second report and excludes the first report, how are we, unless it comes out, and unfortunately usually does in a situation like this, it's in the media, that there was a first report. You know, I am terribly embarrassed here today. We constantly, as members of the Select Committee on Intelligence, are criticized by the members of Congress for not doing due representation. Here we're in a situation, it isn't even covert activity, and Mr. Wolf, who has literally killed himself for his constituents who are federal workers, gets blindsided. So can you blame our colleagues for not being critical of us in a situation like this? Then we get into covert activity, and you know, and I know, we won't go into the whole situation we're involved in now, but this is an embarrassment to the committee, the staff who works constantly to keep us up to date, and then to be handed a report that eliminates the original report, and then we're supposed to know something happened when you can't, and we've tried. There's no paper trail, by the way, between the first and the second report. So I think here, and Mr. Webster, may I say, summer 1990, then we're here in 1991, we had August 2nd, 1990. I certainly hope you weren't involved in this during that period when you know, and I know, you were involved in the most serious thing we've had in years, a war. So I would go with the chairman to say, when you talk to the next director, to tell him that there should be and has to be some trust between the CIA and these committees, or it just isn't going to work, and constantly it seems we get to the point where we're defending, as members of the select committees, ourselves to our colleagues because they say, hey, they lie to you, or they don't tell you. And if I ever saw an example where we are been put into a position of embarrassment, this is one of them.
I really regret that, Mrs. Kenley, and I will do my very best to convey your feelings to my successor, and for whatever responsibility I have in that, I apologize, because that is not my view of oversight.
Mr. Webster, you don't have to. I know you didn't make these decisions, but I appreciate you for listening to me, because we constantly have to deal with this relationship. And it's been a struggle. Since I've been on the committee, it's been a struggle, and when I read the history of the committee, it continues to be a struggle. But when we can't deal on a piece of property, then we really got a problem.
Jim from New York.
Young lady, Mrs. Keneally, is pretty much laid out most of the concerns, Judge, that I've had, and have waited to, express those concerns and ask a question. As I pointed out, I think before the director got here, that everything that we do on this subcommittee, this is the first open hearing I've been to, the first one there's been since I've been on the committee, and everything that we do has to be cloaked with that some degree of security, secrecy, or whatever. But here we're just dealing with a real property, and frankly a consolidation that the people on this committee want to happen in some form or another very much. But it bothers me in that in any consideration of this, and I think the judge is perfectly and clearly aware, let's get this out front, that we feel, matter of fact we know, that this subcommittee that sometimes takes a lot of responsibility upon itself by its very nature in oversight and working with the intelligence community, to find out that for whatever reason the other body and our corresponding committee over there seems to be working hand in glove in this proposition, and we are left out in the dark. And my concern goes beyond the problem, the embarrassment Mrs. Keneally talks about. I think the biggest problem of this whole thing is that the rest of Congress and the public, come up with a feeling that this oversight process that makes the intelligence subcommittees unique relative to any agency of government isn't working. And on the kinds of things that are more important, frankly, than the consolidation, that perhaps maybe we aren't being kept abreast of that. That, I think, is the gravamen of the problem. And when the consideration was made as to whether intentionally or not to keep this subcommittee in the dark, I think that your senior advisors were acting against your best interest. Now, Congressman Wolf comes out to meet with you on Monday, June 11th. And as I said before you got here, I've known Frank since we came here together. You couldn't ask for anybody more straightforward, honest, and credible in this whole Congress. And he walks away from that meeting with the distinct feeling and impression that the decision is way down the road somewhere. You know? And then he finds out 10 days later through a newspaper that a decision was made, and only 10 days had gone by. And in the meantime, we understand that, you know, our counterpart in the Senate were being advised of this. That goes beyond the real property problem. It goes to the problem of how is this whole system working in oversight. Am I wrong in making that assertion?
I think you're wrong, but your observation about the process,
if you tell me
how
where
it
I'm
should
wrong,
be,
I
is
appreciate
right.
that.
Yeah, Congressman Wolf is one for whom I likewise have the greatest respect, and I've always admired the way he has taken care of the human aspect of employees in the federal government, and I've worked with him on a number of those projects. When he came out to see me, I did not have the report. The report had not been presented to me. I had made no decision and did not know what the recommendation was going to be. But partly because he expressed the view to me that he hoped that I would go ahead and make the decision before I left, that I asked them to push that report forward. And I don't know how many days were advanced in getting me that report, but I got it within about a week, I think. And at that point, I asked for more information, primarily focused on Congressman Wolf's concerns about people. And as I was getting that information, I had a request to meet with Senator Byrd, who was concerned that the money that he'd laid aside for us to do our studies were going to get lost in the process if we didn't move forward. And that's really how it developed. I went to see him, and by that time I had received the report. And I told him where I thought I was, and he then asked me to meet with Senator Warner and Senator Murkowski and Senator Boren, and that was either the next day or 2 days later, and that's how fast it went in terms of presenting. It was no intention on my part to bypass this committee.
2 days later than what, sir?
2 days
Is this
after.
2 days after the meeting with Senator Byrd?
Senator Byrd. I think it might even been the next day. The next day.
We're saying is between the time that you had the chance to talk to Congressman Wolf and the time that, you know, the story became manifest through the media, that you'd had the opportunity at that time to meet with Senator Byrd, who had raised concerns about this money lapsing. Is that correct?
I met with with Congressman Wolf on what, July? June what?
June 11th, I believe.
June 11th. The report was given to me on June 12th. And the meeting with...
We have a consolidated, key dates, June 10th, Judge Webster briefed on consolidation recommendation.
Well, I'm looking, my consolidation says June 12th. I'll take whatever's right. What was it? We can correct, we can make that
we'll work that out. We'll work that out. Judge, I think that the point here is, if I may, this committee understands that federal agencies and directors and administrators are often whipsawed politically from different directions. You get all kinds of pressure from different people. We understand that and appreciate that. What we're indicating to you is that in very, very important decisions such as this, it's the procedures, it's the policies that protect you. And the reason we have regular procedures is that so that executive branch officials do not get caught in, quote, political cracks, and that we can be sure that the taxpayer is protected, that the decisions you make are ones that you can justify later, and are ones that make the best sense in the long run. our concern in this committee, and it's not just on this issue. It goes back in previous reports. In 1988, I raised the question about the Reston facility. It's why I directed the language to be inserted. I could not understand then, and I cannot understand now, why an agency such as this cannot follow open, regular real estate procedures in reference to construction, leasing, and facilitizing. That's all we're at. This does not need to be run like a covert action. This does not need to be run with a cloak of secrecy. If you will establish orderly procedures, then we will not be in this position. If you cannot, then let's turn it over to the GSA. But we have to work with the administration. And it's not just an issue of oversight. We conduct oversight, but when you're keeping things from this committee, for whatever reason, God knows what reason, that there wouldn't be a regular procedure here, then it makes it more difficult. We're not trying to embarrass you. All we're saying is, lay out a procedure, tell us what it is, show it to us, put it in print, adopt it, and follow it. If you cannot do that, let's turn it over to the people that can do it, and then we'll know. And that way, Mr. Wolf or any other member of Congress, or Mr. Byrd, or Senator Bourne, or myself, will not be in a position of trying to put you in an embarrassing position. You're the agency's in an embarrassing position today because they didn't follow regular procedures, in my opinion. I think that's the sum statement of it all. That's why the procedure's there. It's not only to protect you, it's to protect us, it's to protect the system. It's so our constituents know that they're getting their money's worth. That's all that's the bottom line. And it's not whether it's economic development in Pennsylvania or Oklahoma or West Virginia or Virginia or Washington, D.C. It's so that we know that decisions are made in a way that people are protected and we're getting the best out of it.
Chairman, I hear you, and I don't disagree with you. I regret that you had already done your authorization before we had our final report and a decision made, or you would have been the first one to...
If we had known, other than February of 1991, that you were about ready to come forward with the report, we might have delayed our decision. And if we'd been included in the meeting, other than just 4 senators, maybe then we'd been in a position to advise. That's not following regular procedure, Mr. Director, and that's the only point that I can make.
Well, I take your point.
Okay. Gentleman from Florida. I apologize for taking this time.
Judge, I don't get offended by political decisions because we work in a political process, and that tends to be an important part of our life. But if it tends to be contrary to the public welfare, then I would think that the political should be set aside. And I'd like to ask some questions about the West Virginia facility, which tends to be the main culprit here. If you're going, I think you said in your testimony you're going to warehouse there, you'll have computer facilities established there, and it would be not labor intensive, but mainly computers and some people to manage that.
Some light industry there.
Yeah. But the fact that there are going to be computers there, shouldn't we assume that you'll need secure landlines of one type or another between that facility and Langley or a number of your other facilities, wherever they might be located?
That's correct.
Does the area of Harpers Ferry and Jefferson County, do they have the facility that you need now for those kind of secure landlines?
You want to answer?
That's part of our proposal. We would have to install them. We would connect them by fiber to our headquarters complex and the other complex.
Would the switching equipment be there, or the ability to handle as much traffic as you would be required to handle? Is that already in the area?
We believe that it would sustain our requirements, yes.
Because I've been in that area quite a few times, and I get the feeling that there's not a lot of activity there.
We put our own switching equipment into our own facility, so we would.
So that would be also part of the proposal. You would have to actually establish the switching capabilities, the fiber optics connections, et cetera. That is not there. Are those facilities available in any of the other locations that have been considered?
we would go through the same process in any of the other facilities.
But if you went to the Loudoun County site, for example, you would still have to install switching, you'd still have to install fiber optics.
Yes, and our concerns with the Loudoun sites primarily were that they tended to follow the Dulles flight path, and our communications people expressed concern that that would interfere with our communications capabilities, and that was one of the prime
That wouldn't
reasons.
interfere with fiber optics. That would interfere with radio type, microwave type communication,
That's
but it
correct.
should not interfere with fiber optics.
That's correct.
When Mr. Richardson asked the question about who were the congressional contacts, Ms. Rankin, you gave him a list of congressional contacts, but you did not mention Senator Byrd. And in response to the chairman's question, Senator Byrd was mentioned. Was that just a slip? Did you just fail to mention Senator Byrd?
I'm sorry, I was speaking to the people that staff people, myself and my colleagues briefed. I have not briefed Senator Byrd. The director met with Senator
No,
Byrd.
you mentioned Senator Warner.
Yes, we briefed
And
Senator
Congressman
Warner.
Mollahan, I believe, and
That's
Congressman Wolf.
correct. That's correct.
We had a specific date, February 19th through June 10th. I don't believe Senator Byrd or any member of his staff was briefed
No,
during that period of time.
Yeah, that's correct.
Was it, well, so the dates are, the only problem is if the dates had been expanded, then you would have included Senator Byrd, is that correct?
Well, I talked to Senator Byrd in October of 1990. He expressed an interest in our problem. He also expressed an interest in our looking at West Virginia. I said that we would appreciate any help we can get on funding studies, but that we would, of course, pick a site that best met our operational needs. And there was no indication on his part of any place in West Virginia we should look, and no promise on my part to work in that direction.
Ms. Rankin said earlier that when asked about how were these sites developed that you were looking at, she said that people were calling sites to our attention, I think words to that effect. Of the people who called sites to your attention, were any of those political type? Were they members of Congress, for example?
Not that I know of, no.
In a meeting with Senator Byrd, he did not suggest a specific site?
None at all.
When was it that you were told that if you moved ahead quickly that funding would be guaranteed?
I don't think we were ever told that.
Oh, I thought I heard that in testimony.
We were said that we would have to move quickly or we would lose the opportunity for authorization to go forward with the acquisition. We were going to have to spend our own money in reprogramming to...
Who told you that?
Well, I believe if Senator Byrd noted that they were marking up these authorization processes. The House had already sent its authorization bill forward, and if we were going to get it to conference for discussion, we had to get our request approved by the Senate Select Intelligence Committee, and for that reason proposed that I discuss it with Senator Byrd, Senator Murkowski, along with Senator Warner.
I guess I must have misunderstood. I was of the impression that you had been told that if you expedited, the funding would be guaranteed. That is not accurate?
No, not to me. No.
Let me ask one more question then, Mr. Chairman. Judge, are you, in reviewing the various comments that you made, can we summarize that by saying that your decision to go ahead with the Jefferson County site was because you believe that it would be the most cost-effective way to do this? That cost was the big driver in making that decision, or were there other decisions involved as well?
The cost was the decision based on what the combination of the high prices in Northern Virginia. I think we go from $100,000 an acre down to $10,000 an acre in West Virginia for purposes and operations that did not require close proximity to headquarters. That made possible the larger site in Northern Virginia, which would contain those elements from science and technology and administration which do have more interaction with headquarters.
But laying fiber optics is a very expensive process, and this is quite a distance from Langley, for example. Was the cost of installing the fiber optics and the establishment of the switching equipment, et cetera, was that all figured into your overall decision on the cost effectiveness of the West Virginia site?
Yes, it was.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Jeff Pietro.
Mr. Director, I apologize for having to be absent from your testimony. I've checked with staff to make certain the questions I wanted to ask have not been asked, but I wonder if you could first state whether my understanding of your testimony that my colleague, Mr. Young, just asked is correct. Did you, in fact, say that aside from your conversation of October 1990 with the Senator from West Virginia, that you had no further direct contact with him in this regard?
That's correct, until the June 19th meeting with Senator Byrd of this year.
And you had no contact with others acting in his behalf, either during that period of time?
I did not, no.
Or members of your staff?
We met with the Senate Appropriations Committee staff in October, preceding the judges' meeting with Senator Byrd, and we met with them to brief the results of our February report in February of '91. That was those two occasions.
So between the February 19th, or the January 29th date, where the 100 sites was narrowed to 10 and West Virginia was not on them, between that date and the date of your decision and announcement, 20th of June, I guess, you had no such contacts with any staff
We briefed
representing him?
We briefed two members of his staff in February.
And that's the totality of contact?
Right.
Thank you very much. One of the underlying assumptions, Mr. Director, of the plan is that CIA would need between 250 and 500 acres of land to accommodate 8,000 employees in 1.5 million acres of space, pardon me. This is page 2 of your report. Your assumptions have now apparently changed. Now you plan to accommodate only 5,000 employees, but your land requirement has increased to 766 acres. Would you explain how a reduction in personnel translates to an increase in land requirements?
I'm going to give you my understanding, but I'd like to be second-guessed by my colleagues here. During this period of time, we've taken substantial plans for reduction in force over the next 6 years, and that was factored in. The additional land goes with the two sites, and the land in West Virginia, $10,000 an acre, is not a major factor in acreage.
If I could elaborate a little bit, when we first started this process, we had a set of assumptions calling for accommodating the higher number of employees that you stated. We also were aware of two possible requirements that we might face somewhere down the line, sometime perhaps after the year 2000. One the director referred to in his testimony as the possibility of having to relocate our National Photographic Interpretation Center. We also have some large warehousing facilities that we feel we might need to relocate.
And those were not considered in the earlier plan?
Well, when we made our original assumptions, we were establishing the amount of land that we felt we would need for the higher number of employees, plus those two possible future requirements. We were trying to do what Congressman McCurdy points out that we had not done previously, to be smart, to look to the future, to try to do it right, okay? In the interim, we became aware that the fiscal environment was changing, that we were going to be faced with reductions. In an effort to be responsive to questions from congressional staff, are you incorporating in the likelihood of reductions into your plans? We then downscaled the number of employees and determined, well, we won't be able to go for both the future requirements. We'll concentrate on consolidating those 21 facilities with the number of people we think they will have as we undergo our reductions. When we started going through our process and looking at the different sites that were available, we realized in our minds that we could do what Congressman McCurdy is trying to help us do, and that is to plan correctly. We, in our minds, thought that by taking advantage of the relative advantages of both of these sites, we could accommodate our current needs and posture ourselves for the future so that if these two requirements came up, we wouldn't have to come back and go through this process again. We would have the land available to accommodate changes that we would be addressing in the future. And that was how we went from we originally started with 500 to 1,000 acres, then we downsized it to 250 to 500. That's the thought process.
Then you
that we
upsized
did.
it again on the restructuring of your plan,
That's correct.
getting smart, as you say,
We hope so.
and in being responsive to the chairman of our committee, you said.
Well, I read his statement today, yes.
And thereafter, you upscaled your plan to 766 acres.
No, I like to make a point.
We're flattered by that, incidentally. That's
Good,
the
I'm
point.
glad.
We're so little, we get so little flattery on this committee, but if you responded to our chairman and upgraded it, then we think obviously that was good judgment.
I'd like to make a point, and that is we have two sites that we feel would best meet our needs. Obviously, we cannot negotiate a purchase of those sites until we have funding and approval. The sites happen to be those numbers of acres. When we go into negotiation, we may or may not purchase, if we get that far, that total number of acreage. We would, again, as we said earlier, would want to negotiate what would be the best arrangement for the taxpayers and the agency.
Thank you. Director, if a rationale for consolidation is cost savings, how do you account for the analysis in the Legg Mason report that says there's only a 5.2% difference in cost between the most expensive close-in site to the West Virginia site? Is that 5.2% the decision factor?
No.
There are other factors involved too. My recollection is that one of those two close-in sites, if not both of them, had presented serious problems from our communications people because of the flight patterns of the of planes coming across the area. Would you care to expand on that?
When we talk about our proposal being cost-effective, we are comparing what we're proposing to what we would see as the alternative, and the alternative would be to stay in those buildings that we have that we can, and some of them we're going to have to get out of because the developers have plans to raise them. Some of them have asbestos in them. To stay in the ones that we can, to acquire the minimal additional space that we would need to solve our most pressing needs at the moment and to alleviate the crowding at headquarters. And if you compare the cost of what we're proposing to that, by the year 2006, we believe our proposal would cost in the neighborhood of $600 million less than that. And moreover, by 2010, about 20 years out, what we're proposing would have saved enough money to basically pay for the project. So in our minds, that's cost effective.
So the Legg Mason survey was significantly inaccurate then, in your view?
No, I think they're pointing out that from their perspective, the cost...
But see, they're not supposed to have any perspective except yours. Did they not look at your perspective?
No, I think the issue is that Legg Mason's a real estate firm. They did a real estate survey. We then did a full program cost. And our decisions were based on full program costs over a 30-year period. And their study, in effect, was recommending raw undeveloped property.
In regard, you say that security was one of the issues. The fiber optics, which you said would have to be laid between the Langley site and this new site, security has obviously been given consideration, and I don't want you to say anything that's improper in an open hearing, Mr. Director. How did you address that issue? fiber optics theoretically are not totally secure, but you have your means, obviously. You've thought that through.
I didn't, in my review, I didn't go in challenge the judgment that this would be handled from any location selected and recommended by the committee in the same degree of security as might be necessary. We have our means of doing it and our ways and places of doing it. If there is something that more than that answer that you would like to know, we'll try to respond to you in a written classified form.
I think in classified form, that would be an important information
We'll do that.
piece to have. One last question, and it deals with the human aspects of this. Legg Mason eliminated Jefferson County, West Virginia, because the distance involved would create hardships for existing employees and may result, this is in quotes, may result in the loss of key personnel. How do you respond to that, and what studies have you done to determine what the impact on relocation will be on CIA employees? Mr. Wolf spoke, and Jim Moran spoke very movingly of these concerns on these thousands of employees who'll have to move. What studies have been done, and what is your attitude on that?
Our analysis leads us to conclude that with almost 80% of our population up in northern Virginia, that most of them will not be adversely affected. There may be some who have to drive another 20 minutes, 30 minutes in the course of their driving. There are presently ways from Charlestown to arrive at headquarters in 70 minutes, and we've checked that out, and those who live in that area use those highways using 340 and coming down and hooking up to 495. Almost everyone in the agency lives within 45 minutes of headquarters or 45 minutes of where they would be asked to work. Those going to West Virginia would include some who by preference would like to live in less expensive areas. And it is less expensive to live there, and they're more open space, and there are a lot of advantages, and many people, in fact, are looking forward to that. There may be some, not otherwise identifiable, who would have problems, and we'll address those problems on an ad hoc basis. This was one of the concerns that I had, and which delayed my decision while I asked them to go back and give me as much information as they could. I know from my experience in my years in the FBI that there are many people working for the FBI who come and spend an hour and a half driving to work in order to have less expensive, affordable housing and in an atmosphere where they want their children to grow up. And I think this is going to increase in time for agency employees, given their salaries and their need to raise families and grow. And we're seeing more movement away from Washington, even as we speak. People are looking for less expensive housing. So I think that some people will be actually pleased at that opportunity. Others will simply absorb another 15, 20, 30 minutes at most under their belt to get there and will not move. I would be very surprised if any significant numbers moved because they felt they had to. They will move because they want to.
Would you make that study available then for the record? That would be very helpful, I think, in understanding that issue.
I'll be happy to let you to have whatever is available made. As I say, it's a difficult process. We use zip codes, and there are other things that we have to fall back on. But I think it's a sound.
Whatever you have would be helpful. Mr. Wolf said that he didn't think people would move, and that many would have a 2-hour commute each direction, and whatever you've got, in essence, to
it's not a 2-hour commute.
allay some of the confusion and concern would be very helpful.
Surely.
If you'd provide that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge, since Legg Mason was part of the original analysis. Is it safe to assume that they would not participate in the land acquisition? They would not receive any compensation for purchasing the land in your name?
I know of no arrangements with them to do that. What is?
Yes, no. Yeah, no.
So then...
They are not the developer and they're not the acquirer.
So we should expect that their report would be objective then. They have no personal interest in further.
We certainly hope so.
Mr. Owens mentioned their recommendation, or the reference to their comment, that there was only 5.2% difference in the cost of the most expensive site and the least expensive site. The next sentence on that same page says, in addition, since this cost comparison does not include communication costs. Now, I'm going to go back to the fiber optics question, because you're talking about laying a lot of miles of fiber optics, and this committee knows how expensive that is. Since the 5.2% doesn't even include that, is it possible that this site might end up being more expensive?
Am I mistaken in this discussion? Because those figures are, I think, apply to the interim report, don't they? The first report?
No, this is the second report.
The second
We're reading the second report.
We developed the communications costs ourselves, and we added those to the information from the Legg Mason report.
But that's...
Our cost estimates include all of our communications costs, including the fiber optics that you mentioned.
But on the page that I'm looking at, it says, on the communications line, it says not applicable, not applicable, not
That's
applicable.
correct. We had them do that much of the work. We felt that we wanted to do the communications costs ourselves. We had our own Office of Information.
Can you give us those figures for the 4 sites?
Sure.
Can you give them to us now?
I really don't understand that 5%, because we're talking $100,000 an acre for the Northern Virginia property and $10,000 an acre for the West Virginia property.
Well, we've agreed that they can be objective because they have no further
That's right.
interest, and they're saying 5.2% or $29 million.
Well, there's $29 million for one site, $42,500,000 for a second site, $25 million for a third site, and $5,160,000 for a fourth site. I don't know where that's in West Virginia. I don't know where that 5% figure.
Well, it came from Lake Mason. Folks you hired to do that.
The $29 million difference between the two sites amounts
I think
to...
their point is that in the total cost, from their perspective, in the total cost of the project, the cost difference among those sites should not be a driving factor, and I think they said that.
Yeah.
We should make our decision based on operational
That's right.
and managerial concerns.
But when I asked the director earlier, was the cost the big driver, he tended to agree that the cost savings was the big driver.
We didn't feel, that was our consultant's opinion, we didn't feel that we should overlook what to us was a significant cost difference in the land values of the two sites.
Do you have the figures for us on the communications costs?
I think we've provided your staff a piece of paper that summarizes the total cost of the program, and that includes the communications cost. Bill, do you have that?
Do you recall what
Yes.
the communication cost was for Site 4 versus, say, Site 1?
No, but let us get that for the record rather than have people fumbling around here. I think...
It's on the summary.
Okay. We'll get that for the record, and staff will advise the gentleman from Florida. Gentlemen, have any further questions?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Director, again, we appreciate your appearing today. I think the point has been scored that we're concerned about the process here. It is not only for the protection of taxpayers concerned, but also the agency as well. And we believe that there should be further oversight and scrutiny and consultation prior to making this decision. And we would like to continue to work with you on that. If there are no further questions, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you.
Fine. Thank you.
Okay.
That concludes Tuesday.